Hey guys, in today's tutorial, you're going to learn how to build a full stack NextJS application that connects to CrewAI to automate some market research for us. Actually, let me go ahead and show you what we're going to be building today. I am super excited to show you the application that you're going to be building today. So let me show you what it does real fast and how it works. So what we can do is we can type in a company that we want to research about, and then we can look up the positions that we want to learn more about inside of that company. So let's look up the CTO and the CEO of Ford. And then what we can do is click start. Now what this is going to do is our front end just told our back end to start a new CrewAI job to go off and start researching the internet and looking up on YouTube to find blog articles and YouTube videos for these different positions inside of the company. Now what is super cool about this is our front end is actually continually pinging our back end to say, hey, CrewAI, do you have any updates for us? And what this is going to do is it's going to actually populate down here in the detail section with research that the job is done as it's basically researching the internet. So you'll see here in just a second, it's going to start popping up with research. And then what's also awesome is then as the crew finishes its research and puts together its final output, it'll actually populate this section up here, and it'll actually have links to all the different blogs so you can go off and read them. And it'll also have links to all the YouTube videos so you can go off and watch those too. So all around, super cool. And as you can see, it just went ahead and populated some information about the CTO that it found, and it'll just keep doing this and researching in the background. And it takes about 2 minutes to run in total, and it costs about 40 cents. So I'm gonna come back right when it's finished to show you guys the final results. All right, so it just finished. Let me walk you through the results real fast. So as you can see in the final output, we now have blog articles and YouTube videos that we can click for each one of these different positions for the CEO and CTO. And then what's super cool is the event details just continually populated as it was researching. So you can see all in all, it took maybe about 2 minutes, like I said, to go off and research the whole thing. And it told us, hey, the crew is done. So I'm super excited to actually walk you guys through this code. And don't worry if you if this was a lot, don't feel overwhelmed. I'm actually going to be walking you guys through this project step by step. And I'm going to be giving away all the source code for this project completely for free. So you can actually just copy it and take it for your own project. So I'm super excited to walk you guys through this project and have you build it all on your own. Also, real quick, I just want to mention that I have a ton of other full stack and CrewAI tutorials right here on my channel that I'm sure you're going to love to watch right after this video. And I also have new content coming to you guys every single week. So if you already haven't hit that like and subscribe button, go ahead and do that before watching the rest of the video. It'd mean a lot to me. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive into how we're going to go about building this awesome new app with NextJS and CrewAI. All right, so welcome to the high-level overview of how this application works. And what I want to do is just walk you through a quick happy path of how everything works at a high level, some of the different components we're going to be building. And then second, I want to cover the order that we're going to be building our application. So let's just walk through this at a super high level. And then as we're building it, we're going to dive into each part a lot more detail. So at a super high level, when it comes to building our application, we can put in our inputs of the companies and positions we want to research on the front end. Then we can click run. And what this will do is it'll make a request to our Flask backend. So that's our Python backend that's going to be running all of our CrewAI stuff. And we're just going to make a request to the API crew endpoint. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to go off and kick off a crew. And instead of, taking 5 minutes for the crew to go off and run, do all the research, and then finally return that to the front end, just coming all the way back, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of separation here. Now, this might sound crazy at first, but I promise you, we're going to walk through this step by step. So don't get overwhelmed. We're going to cover this in a lot more detail later. And I think you're going to be shocked with how simple this actually is. So what we're going to do whenever we kick off a crew, we're going to first give it an ID. So let's just say ID 1. And then what we're going to do is just go kick off that crew and just say, hey, go run in the background. And then what this crew is going to do is, like I said, it's going to run in the background. And then we're instantly going to return a job ID to our front end. And here's why we're going to do that. What we've set up is basically an in-memory database that is going to connect, job 1 is connected to the background crew number 1. And what this background crew is going to do is as it makes progress and has updates for different research it's going to do, it's going to pass along the research to our little in-memory database. And then now what we can do is start pinging the backend with our, hey, API get crew ID, and we can start getting the status of that job. And what we'll do is say okay, it's been 1 second, so we'll just ping the backend. Do you have any updates for me? Oh, it actually looks like you found the CEO of the company. I'll quickly update our events table down here. And we're just going to continually pull it over and over and over again until we get the final result in the status status of the job is complete. So let me just recap real fast. We have a crew that gets kicked off and a background thread. We also have a little in-memory database right here that's just going to store the status of the job, events, and the final results. And from our front end, we're just going to continually ping the backend to get the status of the job. Now, that's how it's going to work at a very high level, and we're going to dive into much more detail in just a second. But the other thing I want to mention is the order of how we're going to build this application. I think it's going to make the most sense for you and I to go off and start building the backend portion of the application first. That way we can test it all out and make sure it's working a-okay. And then after that, we're going to build the front end application that's really just going to hit these two different endpoints that we set up inside of our Flask application. So I know that's a lot, but hey, we're going to walk through it step by step. So let's go ahead and actually start coding out our Python backend and actually setting up everything so that we're set up for success. So let's go ahead and dive into the fun stuff and start coding. All right, guys, so now it's time for us to start setting up our project. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and create a folder that's going to house our backend and front end application. So I'm just going to type in mkdir, and I'm just going to call this our NextJS CrewAI application. We're going to cd into this new directory. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a folder for our backend application. So I'm going to call this makedir CrewAI_BE for backend. Finally, I'm going to cd into this backend directory. And then what I'm going to do next is type in code dot, and this will open up an instance of Visual Studio Code for me. All right, great. So now that we have this set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create all of the files that we're going to use in this folder. And then what we're going to do is just go back in and start filling them out one by one. And the reason I want to do this is because I want to paint a picture of all the work that we need to do first before actually diving in and doing it. All right, so let's go ahead and start off. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new file, and we're just going to call this our api.py file. Now this is going to be where we house our Flask application. So whenever we make a request to our backend application, we're actually going to be using this file. Fantastic. So the next thing that we're going to set up is all of our CrewAI related files. So that means we're going to need to set up a crew.py, and this is where we're going to make all of our different crews. The next thing that we need to do is work on making our task.py. Now this is where we're going to define all of our tasks for going off and searching the internet, so forth and so forth. And then we also need to have our agents.py file. And this is where we're going to define our different agents for our crew. You know, we need to define our research agent and our research manager. And we're going to be setting that all up in our agents.py file. And then we need to do a few other things. So we need to work on creating a models.py file, and we'll dive into this later, but basically just know whenever we need to start working with our front end code, we need our data to be formatted in a very specific manner. And by creating a models.py file, and we're going to be using Pydantic, which just makes it very easy to like structure our data. And we're going to define all those different classes in here. So more on that later. And then the other thing that we need to start working on is creating our jobs manager. Now, if you remember from earlier, I said we were going to be setting up our CrewAI agents to go run in the background. And we wanted those CrewAI agents to be able to, you know, update the job status. So all of that logic is going to get handled here in our jobs manager. And we're going to come back to that later. And then outside of that, we need to work on creating some tools. And these tools, we really just need to work on creating one. And it's going to be so let's go and create our tools folder. I'm going to go in here and go ahead and we're just going to call this our YouTube search tool. And this is going to be where we go off and search YouTube videos to find recent interviews with different CEOs or CTOs and so forth. And just whenever you create a new folder, just so you can access it in the rest of your code, you need to go ahead and create an init.py file as well, just so it shows up as a package. All right, fantastic. So that's pretty much everything that we're going to be actually doing. All of the coding in for our backend is mostly going to consist out of these files. And the other thing that we need to do is non-code wise and more just project development setup wise is we need to create something called a pyproject.toml file. So let's go ahead and create that real fast. So pyproject.toml, and it put it in the wrong folder. It just needs to go out here. Fantastic. So let me walk you through what the pyproject.toml is. Basically, just at a high level, and I'm just going to copy and paste this code because it's pretty boring. But basically, at a high level, what this pyproject.toml file does for us is it goes ahead and defines all of the dependencies that we need to run our backend project. And it also sets up some project application, kind of like metadata. So what I mean by that is by defining this poetry file, we're defining that, hey, we want to make a Python environment called NextJS CrewAI Tutorial. And this environment is going to store all the dependencies that we need to run our project. And then you just add some, like I said, some other metadata, myself, and then Zhao, the creator of CrewAI. Awesome guy. Definitely check him out on Twitter. And I think he has a YouTube channel. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely recommend checking him out over on Twitter. He posts a lot of updates on CrewAI as he builds them. Okay, cool. So now that we have this set up, what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually start working on installing our dependencies and actually getting it up and running. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to hit Control backtick. So that's how it's going to open up my terminal for me. And then what I'm going to do is just run a few commands. So the first one is just going to be called poetry install -- no root. Now what this will do is it'll go off and install all of those dependencies for us and put it into a new Python environment. Now, if you haven't used Poetry before, I definitely recommend watching my CrewAI for Beginners video where I walk you through the whole process of setting Poetry up on your own computer. But for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and assume you have installed. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, and this will go off and install all of our different packages. It takes a few seconds to download everything, but once it's done, we'll actually be able to run this newly created Python environment so we can start, having access to all these new tools. So let's give it a few seconds. Fantastic. So it just finished installing everything. So what we can do now is just type in poetry shell, and this will open up an interactive shell and basically set our Python environment to the active environment. So you'll see we had base, and then now it actually comes up with the new environment we just made. And just as a quick tip, what you can do is if you click down here at the bottom right-hand corner of your code, you can go ahead and see that this is our current basically Python environment, but I'm actually going to change it. And the way you can change it to the Python environment you just created, you'll just copy that spawning shell. Then you'll come up here and click enter interpreter path. And then we're just going to paste our interpreter path. Fantastic. And now it actually shows that we're using our NextJS CrewAI tutorial environment. All right, cool. So give yourself a pat on the back. You just finished up setting up your Python environments. So what we're going to do next is actually start running through these files and actually setting them up one by one so that we have a fully working project. So let's go ahead and start diving in into setting up our api.py file. All right, so now it's time for start setting up our api.py file, and this is where we're going to be running our Flask backend API. What I mean by that is whenever we start sending requests to our backend, this is going to be the file that handles it all. So let's go ahead and start creating our Flask backend application and setting up our endpoints with some to-dos that we're going to start fleshing out as we go. So first thing we can do, like I said, is go ahead and create that Flask backend application, and it's super simple. You can just type in app equals Flask _ name. And this will go ahead and start creating that Flask backend application. Let's go ahead and import that missing dependency. And then what we're going to do next is go ahead and set up some endpoints. And what we're going to do is set up our post request first, then our get request. So let me just show you what that looks like. First thing you have to do whenever creating a backend endpoint is you have to do basically add a decorator. And this is going to decorate a function. And you'll see what this means in a second, but we have to say what endpoint we want to set up. So in our case, we're going to say we want to set up the API crew endpoint, and we want this to be a method of post. And basically a post method means that we are submitting data to our backend. All right, cool. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and create our function that triggers whenever we hit this endpoint, and it's just going to be called run crew. And then what our run crew is going to do is obviously it's going to return some data. So this is what a return statement from a backend application would look like. You're just going to return JSONify, and we're just going to return a status of success in 200. So let me explain what that means. And let's go ahead and import this too. So whenever you make a request to a backend endpoint, you need to get back some data so that you basically get information. That's the whole reason we're going to, make requests to the backend. We want something to happen and we want to get an answer back. So that's exactly what we do here. We wrap up this object and we put it JSONify just so that when we return it, it's set to application content JSON, and we can actually access it on the front end. And let me go ahead and show you what this actually looks like. We just need to, set up and start running the application first and running it on port 3001. And the reason we're doing this on port 3001 is because our front end application is going to be running on port 3000. But more on that later. But yeah, I just want to show you that this is working. So what we're going to do is go ahead and run this real fast with Python, and we're just going to say api.py. And this will go ahead and create our backend endpoint. And this should have been methods. That's my bad. We're going to go ahead and run it again. And as you can see, we have started our development server. But what's cool is we can use the tool called Postman, and you can actually add it by going into your extensions and type in Postman. But what you'll see, Postman, but yeah, there you go. But I've already installed it. So let me just show you an example of what it would look like. So we're just going to make a request to our backend application that we're setting up. So local host 3001. And we need to say what endpoint do we want to hit. Well, we set it up right here, api.crew. So let's go ahead and hit that endpoint. And then we said it's a post type. So we're going to update the request from get to post. And we're not passing in any data yet. But what I would expect is whenever we go off and send this request, we're going to get back a status of success and a status code of 200. So let's go ahead and send it. And then you can see we actually are getting back the data from our front end. So hopefully that all makes sense, because this is the crux of setting up our backend application. So there's the status code number, and here's the object we sent back. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and set up our get route. And what I mean by that for a get route is we want to be able to check the status of a job. So here's how we can do that. Well, once again, we need to set up the endpoint that we want to hit. So in our case, we are going to once again hit the API crew. But what we're going to do is we want to look up the information for a specific job ID. So what we can do is we can wrap it in these anchor brackets, the job ID, and this basically means, hey, this is a variable. And then what we can do is set up the type of this function to be methods.get. And then what we can do is say what function do we want to run, and ours is just going to be get status, and we're going to pass in the job ID. So this is where that job ID is basically getting passed in here like a variable. So we're just going to say getting status. Let's do this. Let's do this right here, just so you guys can see this is in action. So getting status for, and then we'll paste in our job ID. So job ID. All right, cool. So what will happen now is if I type in API crew 123 and I go off and run this, what I would expect to get back is getting status for 123 with a success of 200. So let's go ahead and try that out real fast. Oh, 405 not allowed. Let me update this to get. That was my bad. Send it, and then fantastic. We're getting status for, and then here's the variable. So this is the job ID that we just set up. Okay, cool. So now that we have this set up, what we're going to do next is actually start running through setting up how we want to go about kicking off our crew, because that's the whole point of setting up our backend is we want to start kicking off our CrewAI tasks to go off and search the internet for different companies and positions. So let's go ahead and start stubbing that out next. And real quick, before we go off and set up the crew, I think it's important to show you guys how we can pull out and validate the data that gets sent to this endpoint, because really the companies and positions that get sent to here is what's going to get sent over to the crew. So I think it just makes sense to see how everything flows from end to end. So first thing what we're going to do is go ahead and pull out the data that gets sent to us. So we can just type in data equals request.json. And basically, because you'll notice this is squiggly and we haven't declared a request. Well, that's because we're using Flask. Anytime you use Flask, what you can do is you can expect to receive a request. If you've worked with any backend endpoints, you usually have a request and response, and your request contains all the information about the data and queries you pass up to your backend. Okay, cool. So now that we have our request, what we're going to do is check to see if the user passed up companies and positions to us. So what we can say is if not data, so hey, did they not give us data, or companies not in data, did they not give us any companies, or, positions not in data. So what this is going to basically do is just some simple validation to make sure that the user passed up some companies and positions to us. And what we're going to do is just call abort. Let's do this, abort. And once again, this is going to be coming from Flask. So we can just import it up here, abort. And this is basically going to say like, hey, don't continue doing the rest of this function. And we can go off and actually pass back some statuses to the user. So we're just going to pass in 400, which means, hey, this was an invalid request. And then we can pass back a description. So we're going to say invalid request with the data provided with, we'll just say missing data. That sounds good. Fantastic. So that should be working good. And then this should be if, my bad, if not in. Fantastic. So let me actually show you what this looks like. We're going to be using Postman a lot in this tutorial. So just because I think it's the easiest way to see a backend getting built, and you can basically do some validation. So once again, we're going to make a request to our backend. This is a post request. So let's see what happens whenever we make a request. Let's make sure our server's running. Let's see what happens when we make a request without any data. We should get back a status of something went wrong. And in our case, unsupported media. And it's because I basically passed up the wrong data. But yeah, that's basically should be working. Let's see, body. Yep, this was my fault. So if we do this, we'll get back, hey, you can't make this type of request to this endpoint. But then if I pass in, let's go ahead and just do companies, do that. And then, this should be a JSON. And I just do Tesla. If I do this, it should fail because I'm missing the other thing. Hey, bad request, missing data. And then if I do positions, let's do this, positions. And then I do CEO, we should get a success because we actually, because we passed in all the information we need to our backend. So that was our form of a poor man validation, but hey, we're doing some validation. Okay, cool. Well, now that we've set up this, what I'm going to do next is show you guys how we're going to go about kicking off a crew in the meantime. So the way we're going to go about creating our crew is pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is first create a job ID. And if you remember, the reason why we want to do this is because we are going to kick off our crew to work in the backend, and then it's going to, basically our post request is going to pass back the job ID to our front end so that we can continually pull later on to get the status of the job. So the way we're going to go about creating that unique ID is by wrapping our UUID around a string. So we're going to convert it to a string, and we need to import this real fast. Fantastic. Now with our job ID, the other few pieces of information we need to pass over to our crew are going to be the companies. So we can pull it out from data. And then we also want to pull out the positions. And then we haven't set this up yet, but you'll see this is where we're going to start actually running our crew, where we're just going to run everything in the background thread. Now, don't worry if you haven't used threads before. Super straightforward the way we're going to be using it in this application. You're just going to say thread, and then you have to define the target function that you want to run. So in our case, this is going to be our kickoff crew, which we haven't created yet, but we're about to in 2 seconds. And then we have to pass in the arguments that we want to send to our backend application. So in our case, we want to pass the job ID to our crew, the companies, and the positions. This is everything we need to kick off a successful crew. All right, now let's go ahead and import some of these missing dependencies. So when it comes to importing our threads, what we're going to do is just all the way up top is we're just going to say from threading, import thread. Fantastic. And then it's up to us to go off and create this new function here called kickoff crew. So let's go ahead and create that real fast. We're going to say def kickoff crew, and then we want to pass in the job ID, companies, and positions. Now, I'm going to be using a little bit more typing in this tutorial than I normally do, just because I want us to make sure that we're passing the right type of data around through our application. So let's go ahead and start this off. So our job ID is going to be a string. Then our companies is going to be a list of strings. So companies is going to be equal to a list of strings. And then our positions is going to be a list of strings. Fantastic. All right, then what we can do from here is this is where we're actually going to go off and kick off the job. Now we haven't set this up yet, so let's just go ahead and put in some to-dos. We are basically going to set up the crew, and then after that we're going to need to, run the crew. And then finally what we're going to do is whenever the crew finishes running in the background is we need to, basically let the world know that we're done. So let app know we are done. Fantastic. So that's what we're going to be working on next, just because there's a lot that has to go in into, actually setting up the crews, setting up our agents and tasks. But I just want to paint a picture of where we're going next. Okay, cool. So I think it's time for us to actually go off and start setting up our crew. So let's go ahead and work on moving over and setting up our crew.py file. Oh, and one other thing, we actually need to go off and kick off the thread that we just started. I just realized that. And super simple. All we have to do is just type in thread.start, and this will actually kick off our thread. And what we can do is, like I said earlier, we actually want to pass back the job ID to our front end because we want our front end app to eventually pull this job ID to get status updates. So that looks good. The other thing real fast, this actually should be UUID4. I don't know why that messed up. So it should just be from UUID. Import UID4. Fantastic. So that looks good. Fantastic. So that looks good. And we actually can go ahead and run it just so you can see the job ID getting passed back. So if we come over here, pass this in, send it off. Now we get back a new job ID that is going to be correlated to the thread that we kick off, which is going to have our crew. All right, cool. Now that we have that out of the way, let's actually go ahead and actually start working on our crew, like I said just a second ago. So when it comes to setting up this crew, it's actually going to be a lot different than the way we go about normally creating crews. And what I mean by that is whenever you and I normally go off and create crews, we normally do that in a main.py file to where we usually just run it with a command line. But in this case, what we're trying to do is we want to create a crew per request that the user sends us. So this is going to allow us for, if a user requests to look up Tesla in the CEO, that's going to kick off its own crew. And then if someone else wants to see Ford in the CTO, we can go kick off another crew for them. And this is what's going to allow us to run them in parallel. So enough talk, let's go ahead and actually start setting up this crew. So what we're going to do is create a class, and this is going to be called our company research crew. And then what we're going to do inside this class is three separate things. First, we need to initialize this class. And what we're going to do is really just pass in the job ID, which is going to be the string for the specific crew that we're kicking off. So let's go ahead and set that up. Next, what we need to do is set up the crew itself. So we're just going to create another function called setup crew. And this one, we're just going to pass in the companies and the positions that we want to research. And this is also where we're going to go ahead and put in some to-dos for future us. So this is where we're going to set up agents. We're also going to set up tasks. And then finally, we're going to create the crew itself. We're not going to kick it off here. We're just going to create crew. Now, what we're going to do is actually kick off the crew later on in the application at a later date. And you'll see why we do this later on back in the API file that we've set up. But we're just going to kick off the crew right here. And this is actually where we're going to, like I said, we'll just do another to do. And we'll just say kick off the crew. All right, cool. Well, now that we have that stubbed out, let's go ahead and actually set up just a little bit more of this class. So what we need to do is also set up the crew that's attached to this company research crew. And to start off, we're going to initialize it to none. And then what we're also going to do is down here is we're going to go ahead and stub out the crew logic that we're going to do. So what we're going to do is say, hey, if we don't have a crew, something must have gone wrong when we're trying to kick off this crew. So let's just go ahead and say like, hey, something went wrong, couldn't find the crew, and just return null. Other than that, what we want to do is actually try and actually go off and kick off the crew. So what we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to try this. So we're running the crew, and we're just going to say self.crew.kickoff. And this is how you kick off a crew. And this is, this will have all the agents and tasks set up. And then it's going to actually return the results. But this is going to be running in the background. So we need to do this, results. So this is where we're going to get our results. And then this is where we're going to return the results whenever the task is done running. All right. And then what we're going to do in the exception is just like, hey, if something goes wrong whenever we're trying to run the crew, we just want to, return that something went wrong. So we're just going to cast the exception into a string and return it back. Okay, cool. So this is the major setup that we need to do. And then what I would like to do actually before diving into setting up all of our agents, our task, and our crew, we need to think about the fact that back in our initial logic, we said we wanted to log the status of the crew. So, we want to log that we kicked off the crew. We want to log that the crew finished and a lot more stuff. So what we need to do is go off and create a new file that we're basically start working in our job manager. And our job manager is where we're going to start actually doing all the logic for appending events and really logging what's going on inside of our crew. So let's go ahead and knock this out real fast because we're going to be using this in every file that we're setting up. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and create the classes for the information that we want to store for our jobs. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the data class decorator to let the code know that we're creating a model. And what we're going to do is just create a class called job. Now, what information do we want to store about a job? Well, we want to store the status as a string of, hey, is this job running? Did it fail? Is it complete? The next thing that we want to store is the events. So this is all of the information that our backend agent is saving as it's going out and researching the internet. And this is actually going to be a list and a list of type event. So we need to go off and create that data class as well real fast. So we're just going to come up here, say data class, and then we're going to say class event. And this event is going to have two pieces of information to it. The first one is going to be a timestamp, which is just going to be a date time of like, oh, hey, at 12 o'clock, we started to work on our backend job. And at 12:01, we know we got another event was saying, hey, we found some research. And at 12:05, we actually finished the run. So this is how we're going to store events, and we're going to store basically the timestamp at which it happened. Okay, cool. And the final thing that we want to work on for our job is we want to be able to save the result. So once the job finishes running all the independent tasks and it puts together that final report, we want to be able to save it to this result property right here. All right, so let's go ahead, now that we've set that up, let's go ahead and import some of the missing dependencies. So we're going to say from data class, import data class, and then from typing, we're going to import list, and we're also going to go ahead and import dict for dictionary. Fantastic. Outside of that, we need to go ahead and import datetime. So from datetime, import datetime. Fantastic. We got rid of all of those errors. And now that we've done that, let's talk about what we want to do next. And I think it's super helpful to look at the final output diagram for this project so we can actually see what we want to have happen. So what we're trying to do is we want to append events and details to this job status as things happen. So for example, when the crew gets kicked off, what we want to do is be able to say, hey, job database, I want to let you know that I just started the job. Then as this crew finds different information on the internet, we want to add more events to this database. So we basically just want to continually add new events over and over and over as we're making progress on a job. So going back to our code, what we're going to do is create a function called append event. Now this is where we're going to get a little bit more interesting and start dealing with locks, but I'll explain this in just a second. But the first thing we need to do is go ahead and import our job ID. This is going to let us know, where do we need to append information to, which job. And the next thing is we need to figure out which data we want to add to our messages for this specific job. Okay, cool. So now that we have that set up, let's walk through this. Well, what we're going to do is we need to be able to make changes to this database. But what you'll notice is I have it blocked in this little dotted black diagram. And the reason why is because we want to only allow one of these crews to make information changes to this dictionary or database at a time. And the reason we want to do that is because we're starting to work with multi-threaded basically processes. So, if we're working on this database, updating the database on this thread, and then this thread's also trying to make changes to it, we're actually just going to run into some errors. So all we need to do is basically say, hey, only one of you guys can make changes to this database at a time. Well, that's what we're going to work on. We're going to lock our data and we're going to protect it to only allow this append event to make one change at a time. So here's how we're going to do that. We are going to create a jobs lock, and this is going to be equal to a lock. So we need to import that real fast. So we're going to say from threading, because like I said, this is because we're working with multiple threads. We want to lock our dictionary so only one event can make changes to it at a time. And then we're going to go ahead and make our jobs, really, I call it a database, but it's really just an in-memory database. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a dictionary of type string and job. So this string is going to be the job ID, and then this job is going to be the actual, this job class right here to where we have statuses, events, and results. Okay, cool. So here's how we're going to start adding events to this job dictionary we just created. So we're going to say with jobs lock, so hey, whenever I can actually get into this database and actually make changes to it because no one else is using it, I want to do a few things. Well, first, if the job ID is not in jobs, what I want to do is go ahead and create the job itself. So what we're going to say is we're just going to do a quick, log it real fast and just say, started job. We're going to put our right here. We're going to put to let us know what job ID we're starting. So we'll just say job ID, job ID. Fantastic. And then what we're going to do is actually go ahead and create a new job in our database. So what we're going to do is say, hey, in our job dictionary, I want to use the key of our job ID, and I want to create this new job object. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to open up our job, create a new job, because we've defined what this class should look like. And now we're just going to add the status, events, and results right here. So for our status, we're just going to say, hey, we just started it. Then for our events, well, we haven't really done anything yet. So what we're going to do is just say this is just going to be equal to an empty array. And then finally, for our results, we also haven't, found our results yet. So that's just going to be equal to an empty string. Fantastic. So now we have officially created a new job entry that's started. And now we can actually start appending events to this job. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go with the other way and just say else. This is, whenever we already have an existing job ID, we're just going to print that we're adding data to it. So we're just going to say appending event for job. Fantastic. Just to go ahead and add some logs so we can see what's going on. And then what we're going to do is actually add the event data that we're passing in, and we're going to add it to our events list right here. So here's how we're going to do that. Well, first, we're going to go into our job dictionary. We're going to pull out the job associated with that job ID. And then what we're going to do is access the events list inside of it. And then we're going to call the append function so we can start appending new events to it. So here's what that's going to look like. We're going to open up our brackets or our parentheses, and then we're going to create a new event. Now, what this event is going to look like is we have a timestamp, because if you remember up top, we have a timestamp, and we want this to be equal to date time now. And then we're going to pass in our data, and that's going to be equal to the event data that we're passing into this function. Okay, cool. So you guys actually just finished working on creating this jobs manager to where we're going to be able to basically append data in our crew. We're going to be able to append it in our API. So this was a crucial component that we're going to be using out throughout the rest of our application. So now that we've done that, let's actually hop back over to our crew so we can start saying that like, hey, I actually just kicked off the crew and start using this new function that we just made. So the first thing we want to do is we want to record the event whenever we go off and kick off a crew. So what we can do is just type in append event, and then we're going to go ahead and say we're kicking off the crew, and we're going to pass in the job ID. So let's say the job ID is this, and we're going to say the crew started. So that's going to be the first event. And we need to go ahead and import this new function that we made from our jobs manager file. Great, so that's working. And then what we want to do is after we finish working with a crew, we want to go ahead and say that, hey, we're done with this. So we can say self dot, once again, append events. Sorry, no self, that was my bad. We're just gonna say append events, and then we're gonna say crew completed. And then finally, if something does go wrong, whenever we try and run the crew, we're gonna go ahead and log that error as well. So we're just gonna say append event, and then we're gonna say job ID, and then we're gonna say, hey, the crew failed, and here's the error that occurred. Okay, cool. So that's everything we need for the crew when it comes to logging events. So let's hop back over to our api.py file real fast. Well, what we're going to do is eventually, like I said, we're going to set up the crew, run the crew, and let the crew know we're done. So this is where we're eventually going to start actually updating the statuses of the jobs and the results, but we're going to come back to this in just a little bit. So now that we've kind of painted a picture of what we want to do, I think this is the right time for us to actually start diving deeper into CrewAI and actually go ahead and start building out our agents and our task as well as our tools to go off and research all of the different market information that we want. So let's go ahead and start knocking out our agents.py file real fast and everything else, and then we'll finally come back here once we're done and finish wrapping up setting up our crew. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. And before we dive into coding out our agents, I actually want to take a step back and look at what we're trying to accomplish here. So this is the final version of the application. And as you can see, what we're trying to do is we want to research positions inside of a specific company and find information about blog articles and YouTube interviews for that specific position. So inside of our agent, I'm thinking we really only need two agents. The first agent is going to be a research manager who's going to kind of orchestrate the whole process. And the second part and the second agent is going to be the research agent who's actually going to go off and look on YouTube and look on the internet to find these blog articles and these YouTube interviews. So now that we've kind of said what we want to do, let's actually dive into getting those agents set up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new class to store our agents. So we're just going to say class company research agents. And then inside of here, we want to do a few things. Well, first, we want to go ahead and we're going to initialize some of the tools that we're going to be working with. So I'm just going to put a to-do in here for right now. So we're going to say to-do, add tools. We're just going to print just so it doesn't throw an error for right now. And then we'll come back to adding that later. But the important part is we're going to add our two different agents. So the first one is going to be our research manager. And this is going to be the agent, like I said, who's going to be responsible for orchestrating the entire operation. So what we're going to pass into this manager is going to be the list of companies that we want to research. And then it's like, this is going to be a list of strings. And then we also want to pass in the positions that we want to find out more information about. And then what this function is going to return is it's going to give us back a agent, a CrewAI agent. Let's go ahead and import all of this so don't get squiggly marks. So we're going to say from CrewAI, import from CrewAI, import agent. Fantastic. So that should get rid of that. And now what we need to do is go ahead and create our agent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to paste in the agent that we're going to create, but I'm going to walk you through it line by line just because there's a ton of typing. But I want to explain each part of this in detail. So when you're off building your own agent, you'll understand what to do. Okay, so let's walk through this. We first define the role, say, hey, you are the research manager. Your goal is to create a list of JSON objects containing the URLs for 3 blog articles and 3 YouTube interviews. So basically all this information that you see right over here. Now, here are the companies and positions I want you to research. And here are a few important things that you need to take note of as you're going off and doing work. First thing, the final list should include all the companies and positions. And real fast, the reason I add this important section is every time I run into an error with my crew, I kind of just say, I think that means the information and instructions I provided this agent aren't clear enough. I need to be more concise with my intents and basically what I want the final output to be. So anytime you run into an error, what I like to do is just come back and update this important section just so the crew goes, oh, That's what you wanted me to do. So that's why this is like a list of like 6 bullet points. These are all errors that I occurred when I was spending time building out this crew. So this is hours of work of me struggling with CrewAI, but I finally got it working. So I want to share the results with you guys. But the other thing is like, hey, if you can't find a specific position, just put in the word missing. This is because sometimes it would go off and research and just provide a ton of text that I didn't really care about. The other thing was just like, hey, only give me back real information. If you can't find it, that's fine. It's just say it's missing. Don't stop searching until you find all the information. Sometimes the crew would try and search once on the internet and then just stop. So no, keep going. The other one is sometimes, like I said, these were the same things. Sometimes it would say this company doesn't exist or this position doesn't exist, which is false. Like I'm giving you Ford and Tesla. These companies definitely exist. So don't quit, keep going. And then finally, I wanted to make sure I got the count right. So, hey, give me back this many articles and this many YouTube interviews, because sometimes it wouldn't fully do that, or it would just leave the list blank. Okay, cool. Now let's move on to backstory. So this one isn't super important. We just say, hey, as a company, research manager, just you're responsible for aggregating all information and putting it into a final list. All right. So the next thing what we're going to do is we get to pass in the LLM that we want to do all of the operations. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back up to our constructor and our init file or init function, and we're going to go ahead and define that LLM that we want to use. So we're going to say LLM is equal to, and this is going to be equal to chat open AI. And then we want to pass in the model name. So in our case, we're going to be using GPT-4 Turbo Preview. So I've had really good results with this one. And just to recap, every time I would run this crew, it would cost me about 40 cents. So just take that into account if, I don't want you to rack up a huge bill. So let's go ahead and import that real fast. Fantastic. All right. And the next thing, the init function had too much information in it that wasn't supposed to. Okay. So what we're going to do next is, now that we've defined that, hey, I want you to use ChatGPT for Turbo Preview whenever you're researching. That's great. And then now we're going to pass in tools. So this is going to be the search internet tool and the YouTube search tool. We'll come back and actually build those in later. So I'll add this to do here as well. And then finally, what we're going to do is, hey, we want you to log the results. So that's what verbose means. And then finally, we want you to be able to delegate work. So for example, if our other agent gets back to us only partial information, I want you to have the ability to tell that agent, hey, dude, here's some feedback on what you just gave me. That's not correct. Go off and continue to research. Okay, cool. So that was our first agent. Now let's go off and actually create our second agent. And I'm just this one's going to be more straightforward. So I'm just going to paste it. And once again, I'm going to walk you through it line by line. Okay, so this is our research agent. And if you remember, our research agent is going to be the one who's actually going off and performing the research duties itself. So what we're going to say is like, hey, you're the company research agent. Now it is your job for the positions I give you for a specific company. I want you to find the URLs of the blog articles and 3 recent YouTube interviews with each person specified. It is your job to return this collected information inside of a JSON object. Now, you'll notice in this function, I keep saying like JSON object, and then up here I said list. What's going to be interesting is whenever we hop over to our task.py file, you'll see we actually go ahead and define exactly what those JSON objects look like. So that's just to give you some more preview of what we're about to build next. Like we actually define what these looks like to give our crew some really specific instructions on what we want it to do. This is also super important because, hey, we're not just building this to be a CLI or command line interface where it just spits some text out down here in the terminal. We actually want to be able to return this formatted data in a very specific way to our front end. So it's very important that we're working with JSON objects and that these objects are formatted properly. So, but more on that later once we build out our tools and once we start building out our task, this will make a lot more sense. All right, cool. Once again, I just passed in some more backstory, like, hey, as a company research agent, you're responsible for looking up specific positions. And then I just passed in some more important information. So you could put this up here in the goal or the backstory. It doesn't really matter. The important information is that you just log, hey, these are errors that I've noticed you've done in the past. Only return requested information. Don't go off and find me, the kid's back or the leader's backstory as they were growing up. I don't really care about that. I want the 3 blog articles and I want the 3 YouTube interviews. I know there's a lot. Let's keep chugging. The rest of it is just like, yep, these are the tools that you can use. Once again, we're going to set these up as a to-do. Add the tools. You are also going to use ChatGPT Turbo 4. That is the LLM we've defined for you. And you are also going to log errors and you're going to log information as you're running because we set verbose equals to true. All right, cool. So now that we have this set up, let's actually really quickly hop back over to our agents.py file. And this is where we're going to go ahead and import these agents we just created. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say agents is equal to, and then this was our company. Let me actually go ahead and just copy and paste it. This is our company research agents. So we're going to come over here, type this out, and then we now need to import it. So import agents from company research agents. Great. So we have our agents now, and then we're going to go ahead and actually, create the 2 specific agents. And when I say create the 2 specific agents, we're just, if you look at it, this is a function who returns an agent. So we just have to call this function. So that's what I meant by that. So let's come back. Oh, wrong one. So what we're going to do is go ahead and grab our research manager first. And we're going to say, hey, this is going to be equal to our agents.company. We're going to say research manager. And if you remember, we need to pass in the companies and the positions. Fantastic. And these come from right up here. So that's looking good. And the other thing that we want to do is go off and grab our company research agent. And this is going to come from agents, company research agents. And what you'll notice is we're not actually passing anything into this agent. And that's just because you'll notice whenever the crew is going off and running, this research manager is going to say like, hey, dude, you need to go off and find this. So even though we're not passing in a specific company in specific positions, the crews will talk to each other to pass in information accordingly. All right, cool. So we just set up our agents. So now that we're on a roll, let's go ahead and actually start work on next, setting up our different tasks that we want to actually have these different agents perform. So let's go ahead and dive in. So creating our task.py file is actually going to be super similar to our agents file. And what I mean by that is we're obviously going to need to create a new class to store all of our different tasks. So we're just going to call this our company research task. Let's do this task. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 major functions in here. First, we're going to have the constructor where we're going to initialize everything. But what we're going to do is actually pass in the job ID. And the reason we're going to do this is because as we eventually append events later on, we need to be able to attach it to a specific job ID. But you'll see more of this later. But we just need to go ahead and declare it just like this. So job ID is equal to job ID. Fantastic. Now we can use it throughout the rest of our class. And then what we need to do is looking back at our agents, we need to give each of our agents an actual task to execute. So the first task we're going to create is just going to be called manage research. And then the second task that we're going to work on, let's just say pass for now. And the second task that we're going to work on is just going to be called our company research. So we're just going to say company research. Cool. All right, so now that we have these set up, let's actually go in and start executing these tasks and populating them. So when it comes to managing our research, what we want to do in here is we're going to create a task. And once again, I'm just going to paste in the final result, but walk you guys through it line by line. And I actually have all the source code, like I mentioned, that you can just download for free. So you also don't have to type this out by hand. Just, go down in the description below, download source code, and you'll have access to everything that you guys see right now. And let's real quick go ahead and import some of these just so we can get rid of some of these squiggly marks. So from crew, we want to import task. So from CrewAI, import task. Fantastic. And then we're also going to import dedent. This just helps us with some text wrapping stuff. So from text wrap, import dedent. All right, cool. Well, now what we're going to do is actually start importing everything for these companies and positions. But let's walk through this line by line. So what we're going to do is we want to say, hey, based on the list of companies and positions, use the search results from the company research agent down here. And basically what I want you to do is put together all the information you found into a JSON object containing the URLs for the blog articles, the URL titles for the video interviews for each position in each company. So that's the task that I need you to go off and perform. Now I need you to use this agent. So let's go ahead and start actually filling in some of these different variables. So the first one is going to be an agent of type agent from CrewAI. Fantastic. So let's go ahead and add that up here, agent. All right. So I want this task to be performed by the research manager agent. So that's how we're going to pass it in. And then what we're going to do is say, hey, what is the expected output of this function? Well, it's going to be a JSON object that contains the URLs for the blog articles, the URLs for the YouTube videos, so forth and so forth. All right. And then what we're going to do next is what we can do is up here in the description, we said, hey, I want you to use the research results from the company research agent. Well, how the heck do we pass the work from this agent over to this? Well, normally CrewAI will discuss between agents because like we allow delegation, they'll be able to communicate between one another. But if we explicitly want one task to be passed in to the next task, what we can do is actually provide some context. What we'll do is we'll actually pass in a list of tasks like this, and these tasks will be passed into context. So if we actually go in here, we can see that, oh, the context, this is basically nothing more than just, these are the other tasks that will have their output used as context for this task. So this is actually a super important thing, and this will really start leveling up your CrewAI game as you can start implementing this and using it. So, okay, so that's important. The final thing is, well, what do we want the output of this task to be? Well, if you look at this, the output JSON is a Pydantic model to be used for creating a JSON output. And if you remember earlier, I said we do want everything to be in a JSON output because it's going to make it super easy whenever we pass back the results of our crew over to our front end. Well, how the heck do we go about creating a Pydantic model? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to hop over to our models.py file real fast, and we're actually going to go ahead real quick and just define what we want our outputs to look like. So if you see, what we're trying to do is we want to have a position info list. So let's start working on creating these real fast. Right out the gate, what we want to do first is, let's go back over here. Let me just show you what the final results look like one more time. We want the final result to look like this. We want the final result to have a company name, a position, a name of the user. Then we want to have a list of strings where those strings are blog URLs. And then when it comes to our YouTube videos, we want to have a list, and let's just call them named URLs. And what I mean by that is we want to have the title of the YouTube video, and whenever I click on that title, it should take me to the URL of the video. So let's actually turn those words in final outputs into actual information that we can use. So what we're going to do is say, hey, I want to have a class called position info, and this class is going to inherit from the base model. Fantastic. And then now we need to say, well, what do we want this class to look like? Well, I want this class to have a company that's a string. I want it to have a position that's also a string. I want to have the name of the person who's in this position. Then I want to be able to see the blog articles URLs. And this is going to be nothing more than a list of strings, just like that. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to have the YouTube interview URLs. So YouTube interview URLs. And this is going to be a list, and we're going to have to make a new model or type for this called named URLs. All right, so let's go ahead and import some of these and make some of these new types that we just defined. So when it comes to base model, what we need to do is import that real fast from Pydantic. So from Pydantic, import base model, great. And then from typing, import list. Great. So we got rid of some of the existing squiggly marks. So let's go ahead and start working on this named URL class real fast. And these are nothing more than just types. That's like the best way I would describe it. In Python, you normally don't have to pass around types, but we want to be very explicitly clear with how everything should be structured. So this is how we're going to go about doing it. So for our named URLs, once again, this is going to import from the base models. Fantastic. And we want this one to only have two different fields, a name and a URL. So this is how, coming back over here, the title or name is what you see on the screen. And when you click it, that's going to take you to the actual URL of the video. Great. So we have this set up. So this is what should happen when we, this is what one result will look like. But if you look at it, well, we actually have this result down below. We have another result. So we really have for our final output that's going to be given what we want this managed researcher to output. It's really going to be a position info list. So what we're going to do is come back over here and say, we want to make one final class, and it's just going to be called position info list. Once again, import from the base models, and we're going to just say like, hey, we're going to have a list of positions. All right, cool. So that's us making our types, and this is going to make sure whenever our manage research task finishes up, it's going to output the result in this format that we just defined. So I can go ahead and import it from our models class real fast. Great. So everything is set up for our manage research. So now let's go ahead and start working on our next task, which was just going to be the company research task. So I'm just going to go ahead down here, and I'm just going to paste in the final result, but I'm going to walk you through it line by line so you guys don't, you know how I got to this answer. So let's go through this real fast. So the company research, this is where we're actually going off and researching specific positions for a specific company. And for each position, what we want to do is go ahead and grab the URLs. Oh, this messed up. We want to say find. This was my bad. There we go. Find the URLs for 3 recent blog articles and the URLs and titles for 3 recent YouTube interviews. You know, it's kind of interesting. You'll notice the URLs. Well, if we go back to our models, that's exactly this, the blog article URLs, and then the URLs and titles for the recent YouTube videos. Well, that's exactly what we're doing right here. Those are going to be our named URLs. So you can kind of see how this is all tying together. Cool. So let's keep chugging along. So here's some helpful hints. So what I like to do, just taking a step back, whenever I'm defining a task, I like to be able to kind of do the 6th grader test. And what I mean by that is I should be able to give these instructions to a 6th grader without any additional context, and they should be able to perform the work that I'm telling them to do. And I also provide some helpful tips of like, well, hey, here's how I would go about doing this work if I was you, just to make sure that they're starting off on the right track. So I say, hey, if you're going off and finding blog articles, what I would recommend you do is you would just type into Google, like the name of the company, the position you want to research, and blog articles. And then whenever you want to find YouTube videos, I would just type in the name, the position that you're looking into, and the, interview, just so you can see like, oh, the Tesla CEO interview. And that's how we're going to figure out the interviews that we want to put in back end over here on our front end so people can start watching them. So that's why I did this section. And once again, when it comes down to the important section, all I did was here is like, I noticed whenever I was running this task, things would go wrong. So I would add in like, oh, it's returning additional information that I don't care about. Yeah, don't do that. Oh, you're giving me back fake information. Okay, don't do that. So that's why I put this important section right here. But let's keep chugging along. So the next thing is I went ahead and defined the agent, because this is going to be our company research agent. It's going to be executing this work. And we want the expected output of this task to be a JSON object containing the research information for each position in the company. So the CEO, CTO, whatever we pass in. Then what you're going to notice, I didn't talk about this callback. We're going to save that for very last. So we'll skip that for a second. Finally, once again, we want to define the output of this task and actually what it needs to look like. And it's going to be the position info model that we just created. So if we come back over here, this is what this task is going to output every time. So just company, position, so forth and so forth. And then finally, what we want to do is we want this function to execute asynchronously. Now, what does this mean? Well, right now we're going to have, let's say, we're going to look up for one company, we're going to look up the CTO, and we're also going to look up the CEO. Well, instead of looking up the CEO, doing all that research, once it's done, then start working the CTO, we're actually going to, by working on these tasks asynchronously, we're going to be working on both of them at the same time. Meaning we're going to look up all the information for the CTO and all the information for a CEO at the exact same time. So it's really going to speed up your crews. So definitely recommend checking this out. But it is important to note that this feature of asynchronous execution is only currently available for models using ChatGPT. So if you're using like Llama 2 or Mistral, you actually can't use this feature yet. You might in the future, but just not right now. So it's important to note. All right, cool. So we have this set up, but what we're missing is this self-append callback function. So what is this? Well, if you remember in our final app, what we're going to have down below this final output section is we had that event log, and that event log stored all the research from our task as it was finding information on the internet. So this is actually how we call it. Whenever a function is done executing and the task is completed, we're going to trigger this callback function, which is going to pass back all the information that this task just executed. So here's how we're going to do that. First, we're just going to create a new function up here. And we're just going to call this def append event callback. And we're going to pass in a few pieces of information into this. The first one we're going to actually do is the task output. Now the task output is actually, if you look right here, we're just going to dig into Crew real fast. And let's just look up at output. So you'll notice, where is it at? Basically, whenever a task runs, what it's going to return is basically the task output. Can't find it real fast. Yeah, so whenever you execute a task, it's going to output the result of the task in this task output right here. So this is what we're actually going to be calling. So task output, this is what's going to get spit back, and then we can actually dig into that task output and see what was actually happening. So that's what we're going to be using right here. So hopping back over here, what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. First, we're just going to log the event so we can actually see what's happening. So we're just going to say like, hey, we're pinning this event to our events log so we can see what was going on. And then finally, what we're going to do is actually trigger and call the append event. So what we need to do is import this from our jobs manager that we created a while ago. And we're going to say, hey, for job ID number 12, this task just finished. So this is what the task spit back out to us. So, it might say like the CTO of Apple is so-and-so, and here's an interview with them. So go ahead and just add that to our logs. So that's how all of that's working. So like I said, if you have any questions on this, feel free to ask it down in the comments below, or hop over to our Skool where, you and I can talk about this more. But this is everything that we need to set up for our task file. So let's hop back over to our crew now that we have our task set up, and we're actually going to start kind of connecting some of the dots. So now that we have our task set up, let's go ahead and remove this to do, and we're going to go ahead and import them real fast. So task is equal to, come back over here, our company research task. So paste that in real fast. We're going to import it. Fantastic. And now what we're going to do is two separate things. So instead of just saying, our company research task is equal to basically creating a new one of these, what we're going to do is we are actually going to iterate through each one of the companies and positions and create a task dynamically. So, and the reason why we want to do this is because if you look in here, what we're trying to do is for every company, so imagine we said Apple and Tesla, for every company, I want to look up at Apple, I want to find the CTO and CEO. And then for, Tesla, I want to look up their CEO and CTO. And for Ford, I want to look up their, CEO and CTO. So that's why we've kind of set up this task to take in one company and multiple positions. So we need to, as we're building our task, actually design it so we're passing that information in properly. And here's how we do that. Now, I know that was a mouthful, but here's what it looks like in action so you can see it. So we're going to create our company research task, and this is going to be equal to an array or a list. And here's how we're going to populate this. What we're going to do is we're going to create a task. So task.company research, and we are going to pass in the company research agent, because you can see we're passing in the agent. So company research agent. Then we're going to pass in a company. And then we're going to pass in, after that, we're going to pass in the positions. Well, you'll notice company is squiggly, so we don't have that variable defined yet. So here's how we create it. Well, we're going to do a for loop. So we're going to say for company in companies, I want to go off and create this. So this is how we go about making this happen. Let's say, I didn't mean to put the square brackets there. Yeah, but basically what this is going to do is it's going to create, for every company we have listed, it's going to create a task for us. That's basically what's happening in a short sentence. Every company, we're creating a task. Whew, that was a mouthful, but don't worry. What we're going to do now that we have all of our tasks set up for our research task, what we're going to do is we're going to pass all of these tasks into our manage research task. So let me show you what that looks like real fast. So we're going to say task.manage research. And if you remember, let's look at what we need to pass into it. We need to pass in our agent. So that was our research manager. Next, what we needed to pass in, come back over here, we need to pass in our companies and positions. So companies, positions. And then finally, what it's telling us to do is we need to pass in the list of tasks. And just to make this go full circle, if you hop back in here, the reason we passed in task is because we were adding that to the context for this. So, as we go off and finish researching all of those companies and positions, we want to pass the result of this into our manage research task so that it can aggregate all the data and then finally put everything, all nice and pretty into one final result for us. So I hope that makes sense. That was a lot of what's going on. But like I said, if you have questions, drop it down below. I'll make sure to help you guys out for it. Okay, cool. Well, now that we have set up all of our tasks and we've set up all of our agents, let's go off and actually create our crew now and set it up. So what we're going to do is just say, let's see, delete that. So we're just going to say self.crew that we've set up here earlier. We're going to set it equal to a brand new crew. So we're going to say crew. We're going to import it from CrewAI up here. So from CrewAI, import crew. And then what we're going to do coming back to here is we're going to pass in all the necessary information into it. So if you hover over it, you can kind of see everything that we need to pass in. But in our case, we only need to pass in our agents and our task. So we're going to say agents is equal to, and then we're going to pass in the two agents that we create up here. So it's going to be our research manager, and then it's going to be our company research agent. And then next, we're going to pass in our task. And our task, this one's going to be a little bit tricky, but basically what we're going to do is we're creating a list here. And what we want to put in this list is going to be all, basically we want to put a list in a list. So here's how we do that. Just copy and paste this right here. And basically, if you put this asterisk in front of it, it almost spreads that list out into this list. So it kind of just flattens it out. It's like the best way I would describe it if this is your first time using that little asterisk operator. So this was a list. We're trying to put the list in a list, but we want to flatten everything out. And then finally, what we're trying to do next is we want to put this new manage research task inside of here as well. So we're going to do that real fast. And fantastic. So we've now created our crew with all of our agents, all of the dynamic tasks we just created for research, and our managed research task. And then finally, just so we can see what's going on, we're going to set verbose is equal to 2. And what this will do is it'll make sure we basically get logs for literally everything. All right, cool. So we just knocked out a ton of stuff. So let's go ahead and actually hop back over to our API. And inside of here, we're actually, now that we have everything set up for our crews, we're going to finish connecting the dots whenever we kick off a crew. So let's go ahead and start knocking that out real fast. So when it comes to creating this function, let's walk through this step by step. Well, the first thing is we want to set up the crew. Well, here's how we're going to do that. We just created this create company research class over here. So we're going to call company research crew right here. So company research crew, let's go ahead and import it real fast. And what you'll notice is we need to pass in the job ID. So we have the job ID from right here. So job ID, fantastic. And then what we're going to do is actually go ahead and save this. So we're going to say company research crew, because this was a class, so we created an object from that class. And then what we're going to do now that we have this object, what we can do is actually call the setup crew function that we created. And then we're going to pass in the companies and positions to this so that we can actually set up our crew. And hopping back over here, you'll see this is where we go off and set up our agents, set up our task, and we create the crew and save it right here to self.crew. So coming back over here, what we're going to do now is we can actually go ahead and kick off that crew. So we can say results is equal to company research dot, and then now we can call the kickoff function. So whenever we call the kickoff function, let me show you what it's doing. This is where we came back down here and we said, all right, we're now going to kick off the crew. So this is where we're going to say, hey, we started it. So we're going to log that we're starting it. And then we're actually going to come in here and kick off the crew that we created up here. So here's where we created the crew and here's where we kick it off. Okay, cool. So now that we have that set up, what we can do is we want to actually go ahead and put this in a try statement, just because sometimes things can go wrong when we're running the crew. So what we're going to do next is we need to have an exception to handle the case when something does go wrong. So this is where we're just going to say, hey, we're going to print it, something went wrong, and then we're going to use our append event logger, and we're just going to add the error that, hey, the crew failed. Let's import that real fast. And then what we're going to do is with the jobs lock, so with jobs lock. So this was, remember, from our jobs manager earlier. So let's go and import that. So come back over here, our jobs manager. So we're going to say from jobs manager, import jobs lock. Great. And what the reason we want to grab this job lock is because for this specific job, what we want to do is update the status and the result of the task. So what we're going to do is go ahead and grab that jobs dictionary, which is storing the state of everything. And then we're going to grab this specific job ID. And then what we're going to do, we actually need to go ahead and, is it going to let me import it real fast? It's not actually. So let me do this. So we also want to grab the jobs object. Great. Now it looks good. And what we're trying to do is we want to update the status of this to equal error. And then what we want to do is update the final result of this job too. So I'm just going to do this. We want to update the result, and we want the result to be equal to, just let's stringify that error that we just grabbed right here. Okay, cool. So that's the case when something goes wrong, but let's talk about when something goes right. Well, what we want to do, come back down here, is once again, we're going to use our job lock. So with job lock, I want to update the status to be completed because, this crew is going to take, a few minutes to run. But once it finally finishes, what I want to do is actually update the status to be complete. And I want to update the result. And I want the results to be equal to this. So, but sometimes it's not gonna, like I said, this was a try block. So what I need to do is actually go ahead and move the results up here. This way, this result's gonna update it up here. And now I can finally grab it back down here. Okay, that looks great. And then finally, what we're gonna do now that we've updated the job results is we're also just gonna go ahead and append that final event to say, yep, the crew completed. So this way we can have a timestamp. So one more time, we're gonna pass in the job ID. Now we're gonna grab the events list. We're going to append a final event to it, and we're just going to say that we're going to make a new event too. So event, and this event is going to come from basically over here when we were making our jobs manager. We need to do one final import, so event, and we're going to make it down here. And inside of this event, we want to say, hey, the crew completed as the data. So data is equal to crew completed. And then we want to say the timestamp is equal to now. Timestamp equal to datetime.now. Okay, that looks great. So let's go ahead and import that from datetime real fast. That should looks good. Yep, I'm happy with that looks. So this is the happy path if something looks great. And then, yeah, we basically just went ahead and implemented all these to-dos. So let's go ahead and get rid of that real fast and get rid of that. So yeah, just to recap what we did, we are going to try to kick off the crew. We're going to set it up, kick it off. And once the crew finishes, after running for a few minutes, we're going to save the results here. Once the crew, like I said, finishes happily, we're just going to update the status to complete so we can tell our front end, hey, dude, you don't have to keep searching and pinging the back end to figure out the state. We're done. Here are the results. I saved them for you. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and just to our event log, we're just going to save a final timestamp when this crew completed, just so we can see, oh yeah, it did take 3 minutes to finish. All right, so that looks great. So I'm pretty happy with the way we have this API set up for kicking off the crew, but let's go ahead and actually update this final part down here, where right now we're just actually returning the status of the job. But what we really need to do is update this get endpoint so that whenever we do look for job ID number 2, we actually want it to get back all the information that we're saving as we're updating our job and everything. So let's go ahead and actually just knock this part out real fast. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and create some space for ourselves and then walk through this step by step. So the first thing we need to do, let's just go ahead and put some do's. We need to lock the job. Once we lock the job, we're going to be able to like see if it exists. And then, so we're going to just like check to see if it exists, check to see if it exists. And then from there, what we're going to do is right now, all the data, even though in our models, we kind of have them saved as this. Well, whenever we actually try and grab these models, they're really going to be saved as strings. And what I mean by that is if you look back at how we're handling basically saving our results, whenever we were working on finishing up the crews back here, whenever we save the results, this is really going to come back as a string. Even though it's going to be in the format of a JSON object, it's going to be a string. So what we need to do is actually parse the JSON data, and you'll see this in just a second. And then finally, we just need to return everything. So return everything. Okay, so let's start knocking out these to-dos that I've just created. So once again, with the jobs lock, what we're going to do is we're going to try and get that job. Now, there's a chance, because this is our backend, there is a chance that that job ID doesn't exist. And whenever that happens, we actually want to send back a status code of 404, meaning, hey, we didn't find this, and just let the person know that, yep, this job does not exist. Okay, cool. So that's knocked out those two. Now what we're going to do is parse to make sure that we're get the JSON data from our results. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to say, we're going to do a try because this can fail. And we're just going to say the result.json. So this is like, hey, after we've parsed it, well, what we can do to parse the data is call json.loads, and then we can pass in the job results. Now we need to go ahead and import JSON real fast. So we're just going to import, and this is actually, make sure you import the right one. We're not importing JSON from Flask. We're just importing the regular JSON. So this is what's going to convert our string over to a JSON object that's going to get passed back to our front end. But this can fail. So what we need to do is just throw a except catch block up here. And then we're just going to just say, hey, if this ever fails, what we're going to do is just actually make sure the job result is just equal to this. And this works fine, because let's walk through the different scenarios. If the job just started, well, the final output of the result is just going to be a string. So this will get triggered. Well, what happens when the job is completed? Well, if the job's completed, it's actually going to be in a JSON string, so we can actually parse it. So this is going to catch it and work for that different scenario. And if we get an error, the error will most likely be a string and not a JSON object. So this except catch block will once again handle that use case. So I hope that makes sense, but this is really what's doing the heavy lifting for us to make sure that we can return everything to our front end in a nice formatted fashion. Okay, cool. We got that set up. So what we're going to do next is actually return everything. So let's go ahead and get rid of this, and let me show you how this is going to work. We're going to return a JSON object. So return, we're going to JSONify it again. So JSONify. Now what we're going to do in here is we want to return a few different things. First, we want to return the job ID. We want to return the status of the job. We want to return the results.json that we just created. Then we want to pass back all the different events to the front end. And we also want to give back a status of 200 because everything works. So let's go ahead and do that. Great, but this actually fully isn't going to work. And the reason why is because these events are basically not in the proper format. So what you really need to do to make sure our events come back in the proper format is do this. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to return an array where everything in that array is we want to format it to something properly. So we're going to say, hey, for every event in the jobs event, I want to update the timestamp to be in an ISO format, and I want the data to look like this. So this is just something you basically can't just pass back models. You have to pass back strings inside of this. So that's why we had to iterate through all of them and reformat them. Okay, cool. Well, we have just set up everything inside of our API. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and save it. And now what we're going to do is rerun this backend script, and we're going to go ahead and try actually testing it. We're going to try hitting the post. We're going to see if it kicks off a crew, and then we're going to test the post, kick off a crew, and then we're going to test fetching it. So let's go ahead and open up Postman real fast and start trying this out. Oh, real quick, guys, I actually made a mistake. We aren't done setting up everything. If you remember earlier, I said we had some to-dos when it came to setting up our agents. We actually have to go ahead and add our tools. So I meant to do that real fast. So what we can do is actually head over real fast to our tools folder, and we're going to open up that YouTube search tool. Now, this tool, I'm not going to go super into depth on like coding it out just because there's so much that goes on, but I'm going to walk you through it line by line so you guys can actually see what's going on inside of this and understand a little bit of the why behind what I did. So when you're off creating your own tools, you'll understand what we want to do too. Okay. So here is the YouTube search tool, and it is composed of a few different components. So there's the YouTube video search tool itself. This is what we're actually going to be using inside of our actual code. So whenever we want to go off and search a video, this is the tool that we're going to use. But what we have to do is we have to define what arguments we want to pass into this tool. So, you know, as the crew is determining, hey, I need to look up the CTO of Tesla and I need to find some YouTube interviews about them. Well, this is actually the tool that they're going to use. And this is how we tell it that it can interact with this tool. So we tell it, you know, once again, we're using base model. We're extending from our base model because we're pretty much typing up everything using Pydantic for much better performance with our crew. We're saying, hey, you can pass in a keyword. So this is what you want to look up. And then you can also pass in the maximum amount of results you want to get back. So you can get back 3 videos, 10 videos. It's up to you to tell me what you want. So that's what we're doing right here. We're saying, hey, for our YouTube search tool, here's the name of the tool, and this is a brief description of what it does, just to give the crew some context. And whenever you want to use it, this is the argument schema that you need to pass in. You need to give me the keywords and max result. And then whenever you go off and create a tool, this is basically, you have to create an _run function. This is just the default run function that gets called anytime you use this tool. So let me walk you through this real fast. We're saying whenever you run this program, you need to pass in the keyword and the maximum results, and we'll give you back a list of video search results. And a video search result is nothing more than a title of the video and the URL to the video. That's all we really need for our use case. But here's what's happening. We're going to go off and make a request to the Google API, and we'll set this up in just a minute. But what we're going to do is make a request to the Google API, and we're going to pass in some parameters saying, hey, here's the keyword I want you to look up. Here's the maximum results. I want to only look up videos, and here's my API key, so you know that you're making this request on my behalf. Then we're going to make that request, and we're going to get back a response. And what we're going to do with that response is we're going to convert it over to JSON, just so we can actually start parsing through it and grabbing different properties. And we're going to get the items that were found in this search result. And if you actually go off and look up the Google API, it'll give you a perfect tutorial of how to use their tool, but this is just a quick speed run. But the important thing is, what we're going to do is we're going to get back a list of items that we found in our YouTube search, and we're going to iterate through each one of those items, grabbing the specific information we want, which is the title and the video URL. So here's how we do that. We're going to have a results list, and what we're going to do is grab the title from the item. Then we're going to grab the video ID, and to get the video URL, what you do is you put the video ID at the end of the video URL, and that's basically how you get the video URL. And then we're just going to compact, or basically add all of that information to our results list, and then we're just going to return it. So that's how this custom tool is used. And if you look back over here, we need to actually go ahead and add it into our agents.py. So what we're going to do right here, just come back down here, we're going to go ahead and initialize this tool. So we're going to say self YouTube search tool, and it's going to be equal to our YouTube video search tool. and that's come back over here. That's the name of it right here. So we can go ahead and import this from tools.youtube search. Go ahead and import that. Great, that looks good. So what we're going to do next is actually go ahead and I'm going to show you how you guys can set up that API key that it was asking for right here. So what we're going to do, we're going to head over to Google. And once you're on Google, what you're going to do is just type in Google Cloud API, and you're going to want to click that Google Cloud Platform link, which will take you over to right here. Now, if you haven't created a Google Cloud Platform before, you're going to want to go ahead and do that. It's completely for free, but you're going to need to set that up. And once you've set that up, what you're going to do is come in here and you want to create a new project. I went ahead and I'm just going to be using an existing project. It's just called CrewAI Automation, but please go ahead and just create a new project. And when it's done, it'll take you to a screen that looks just like this. Now, here's what you need to do. First, you need to click API and Services, and this will open up a new window. And what it'll do is it'll show you your enabled APIs and services. Now, in our case, what we want to do is we want to enable YouTube data. So you can come in here and you can type in YouTube, and we want to click YouTube data API v3. Once you click that, it'll show this result right here. And what you want to do is you want to enable it. Your screen will probably show disabled, but you want to go ahead and enable it. And this will allow you to actually start making requests from your application over to using YouTube. Okay, cool. So once you've set up that, let's hop back over here and let's go back to Google Cloud. And then what we're going to do is we need to actually go ahead and get an API key. So once again, click API and Services. And then what we want to do is go over to credentials. Now, once we're on credentials, what you and I want to do is we want to go ahead and create a new API key. Because if you remember, what we're trying to do is we want to get this API key right here. So all you need to do is just right at the top, click credentials, click API key. And it'll actually generate an API key for you. And this is super secret. Don't share this with anyone else or they'll be able to make, requests on your behalf. So I'll show you how to keep it secret in just a second, but click copy. And then what you're going to do is you're going to head back over to your application and we're going to create a .env file. And this .env file is where we're going to start storing all of our YouTube credentials and our OpenAI credentials. So what we're going to do is just click YouTube API key, come over here, paste it in. Fantastic. So we now have access to whenever this runs, it's going to grab our environment variables that's linked to YouTube API key, and it's actually just going to get this string right here. Great, this looks good. Now, what we also need to do, especially if you're going to be using GitHub, you need to add a git ignore file. Now, what this git ignore file can do is we can add in a .env file. And what this will do is say, hey, whenever you're going off and uploading everything to GitHub, I want you to ignore this .env file. And this way, it's just going to keep our environment variables on our local computer and not up on the internet to where someone else can grab them. Okay, cool. So that's what we're going to do to get YouTube set up. And we also actually need to go ahead and make another change, and we need to go over to OpenAI, and we need to go ahead and actually set up our API keys over here. So let me go ahead and open up another browser real fast. And now I'm just going to type in openai.com, and then I'm just going to go over to log in. Once you log in, you're going to go over to API. And I'm sure you've probably done this a ton of times. I just want to show you guys exactly what you need to do. You're going to click API keys. We're going to create a new API key. So I'm just going to call this NextJS CrewAI YouTube. This is going to create a secret key for me. Now, once again, you're just going to need to copy this one and keep it secret. And you're going to come back over to your code and you're going to just paste it in right here. Now, what you need to do is we need to name this the proper thing. So in our case, we're going to call this our OpenAI key. And this is just going to save right here. And this way, whenever we were using our LLMs earlier, like this one in our agents file, what this chat OpenAI is going to do is by default, it's going to look for our OpenAI key. So OpenAI API key. Yeah. So whenever it looks for default to figure out what your API key is, it's just going to look up for this key right here. And that's exactly what we have it saved at. Okay, cool. So now that we have YouTube search set up, we actually need to set up one additional tool. So let's come back over here to our agents.py file. And what we want to do next is we need to give our agents the ability to go off and search the internet. So you see I have this search internet tool. Well, here's how we're going to create that. We're going to come up here to our initializer and then constructor, and we're going to say self, and then we're going to call this our search internet tool. And this one, we're actually going to use the Serper dev tool. And the reason why I'm using Serper is because they do a great job of searching the internet and then just providing us a snippet of the article. Anytime I've used any of the other API tools to go off and search the internet, they give me back way too much information, and this blows up in our face because as we're having to parse through all this information, our agents kind of get a little wonky and they're like, hey, I'm doing so much, I'm trying to read too much, this is way too much context, and a lot of the times they'll provide the wrong results. But Serper does a great job of only giving me back the information that I need. So what we can do is we can actually import this tool over from CrewAI tools. So here's how we're going to do that. we're going to say from CrewAI _ tools, and we're going to import our Serper dev tool. Fantastic. So now we have access to this tool, but we're not done yet. We actually need to go off and get an API key for this tool as well. So what we're going to do, head back over here, and we're going to go to serper.dev. We're going to log in, and it's completely for free. You get up to 2,500 free queries. So let's sign in real fast. So I'm just going to sign in for you guys. If you haven't signed up before, you'll need to do this real fast. Let's go ahead and do this. Great. So I'm going to sign in, and what we're going to do is you're just going to click API key up in the top right hand corner, and this will go ahead and create an API key for you. Let's copy it. And then what we're going to do, come back over to our application, our .env files. This is the last time we have to do it, but there's just some setup process to this. So we're going to say Serper API key, and then this one's going to be equal to that code we just grabbed from Serper. Okay, cool. So we now have all of our tools set up. So let's head back over here to our agents file. This is looking good. We have that set up in our initializer and our constructor. So that to do is good. And that to do is good as well. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do next is I'm just going to come down here. We're just going to do some live debugging together. So let's go ahead and start trying to run our application and actually see what happens. So we're just going to do Python api.py, and this will tell us what errors we have, or it'll start running our server. Let's just do some live debugging together. Okay, things look great. So now that things look great, what we're going to start doing is we are going to start making some requests to our backend to actually try out those 2 endpoints we talked about earlier. So what I've done is I actually went ahead and basically saved some Postman setups for us. So I saved the post request where we're going to go off and kick off a new crew. And I went ahead and created another one, which is going to make a GET request on our behalf. So let's go ahead and actually try starting off this one, which is our post request. And in order to get it working, what you'll have to do is down here, you'll have to click body. And once you click body, you'll have to click raw in JSON. So this will send a raw JSON object to our backend. And we want to pass in the companies we want to look up and the positions we want to search on. So let's go ahead, try this and see if we get any errors real fast. Click send. And yep, we did actually get a quick error. Let's look to see what's going on. So what it's saying is one of our tasks doesn't have the proper information. So let's work on knocking this out real fast. So basically it looks like whenever we were creating our crew.py file and we were making our task, we weren't passing in our job ID, which was a required parameter that we needed to pass in. So let's actually close out of that real fast, head over to where we were setting up our crew down here. And then what you'll notice when we were creating our task right here, if you look, it's asking for our job ID. So let's go ahead and pass that in. So we're just going to say self.job ID. Fantastic. Now let's try running it again. So it restarts automatically. So let's ping it again and just keep debugging. We're going to send another request. All right, we have one other issue real fast. So it looks like we need to do a few things. And the first one is we need to fix the way we're going about appending jobs. So let's go over to our jobs manager file real fast. And it looks like the first error is because we are checking to see if the job ID is in the jobs. And if it is, we create a new job. And that's not right. We actually want to do if the job ID is not in the jobs dictionary, then we want to go off and create it. There's another error that I realized I made too. If we go over to our task.py file, what you'll notice is we are just getting the task output and we're passing it along to this append event. That's not actually right. If you come back down here to the task definition and then look for exported output, this is exactly what we want to get. So just like let this make sense. Whenever you get a task output, it's an object, and we're just trying to get the exported output of that task object. So let's head back up here to our event, and we are just going to put that right there. Fantastic. And then finally, when it comes to working with our crew, our jobs manager, there's one other final issue we need to fix real fast. So if you look at this jobs class, what you'll notice is it's status, events, and result, but we're doing status, event, and results plural. So now that we've fixed all those errors, our server should be up and running again. So now let's try running our crew again one more time. And then fingers crossed this got rid of all the issues. And it looks like it did. So now we're off researching and actually getting all of the different titles and everything. So now what we should be able to do is come back over here to our get results. And what you'll do is you'll want to copy this job ID. Come back over here and we're going to paste it at the very end of this get request. just like this, paste it, and then we're going to start sending different requests to the backend. And what's cool is you can see in our terminal that, oh, we just had a GET request to this endpoint. And if we start looking in here, you can see all the different data. So you can see that we have an event that the crew started. You can see the job ID right here. And if we keep pinging it, you'll see that we keep getting more and more data because it's actually searching for forward and lucid motors to find all the information. So congrats, guys. The backend is officially set up, and this crew is just going to continue to run until it finishes wrapping up. But we're just going to let that finish. And what we're going to do now is we are going to head back over and actually start working on our front end task now so that we can actually go ahead and connect everything up. So let's go ahead and dive into setting up our Next.js application. All right, guys, so it's now time for us to start building out our Next.js front-end application. And just as a precursor, if you haven't already installed Node.js on your computer, you need to go ahead and do that before you can start running these commands. So I'll have links down in the resources below to show you how to install Node and NPM, which is your Node package manager. Okay, so go ahead and do that, pause the video. But if you already have finished that step, it's now time for us to start actually going ahead and creating our Next.js application. So what you're going to want to do is change directory into wherever you have set up your master Next.js folder. So you can see if I type in ls, you can see that we're in the root folder of our project where we can see the CrewAI backend. Now what we're going to do is actually go ahead and create our Next.js application. So what we're going to do is type in npx, which is going to stand for npm executable. Then we're going to do create next app. So this is going to say, hey, go make a create next app. Then we're going to use the latest version of Next.js. Then we're going to say the name of our project. So in our case, we're just going to call this our Next.js app. And then finally, we want to make sure that we use TypeScript when creating our Next.js. Then we want to use Tailwind. Tailwind is going to be a package that allows us to style our Next.js project super easily. And then lastly, we want to do ESLint to make sure that we properly lint our project and make sure we don't have any bugs. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter. And what this is going to do is take a few seconds to go off and actually install everything. But we're going to walk through the install wizard real fast. So the first question is, would you like to use the source directory? We're just basically going to hit the default for everything. So we're going to say no. Would you like to use app router? Yes. Would you like to customize the default? No. All right. So now it's going to go off and install all of those dependencies I was just talking about. They should take a few seconds to go ahead and install just to set up our entire Next.js application. But once it finishes running, what we can do is go ahead and do code dot, and this will actually open up the entire folder for our backend and front end application. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's open up Visual Studio Code here in just a second. So now we can go ahead and see it. Yep, fantastic. So now you can see from our root folder, we can actually access our backend application and run it, or we can come in here to our Next.js application and actually start running it. So what I'm gonna do is just quickly walk through how this Next.js application works, and then we're actually gonna dive into building out this whole process. And there's really only about like 4 or 5 files that we need to do to get our front end application up and running. So I'm super excited for us to knock this out. And I actually think the best way to go ahead and show you how this project worked is to actually go ahead and run it and point out all the different files. So what we're going to do is come down here into the terminal. We're going to change directory over into our Next.js front end application. And then once we're in here, we're going to go ahead and run it by typing in npm run dev. Now this should start our development server, and you can see it's going to pop up on port 3000. So it's running. What I'm going to do is just put everything side by side so you guys can go ahead and see this application in action. So here it is, should start up, and let me walk you through the files. Okay, cool. So it's up. So here is how Next.js works when you're using App Router in Next.js 14, because that's what we're using right now. So what happens is we have our root folder, which is going to be our app folder. This is where you're going to store and code up all the different pages that you want to show up in your application. And the way Next.js works is it does dynamic route-based pathing. So what I mean by that is the app folder is your root directory. So if you go to like just /root, this is going to be your root directory. But if you were to like set up another folder called like test, here we go, another folder real fast, and we're going to call this one like test route. Well, what this would do is if you set up like a page in here, page.tsx, what would happen is if you actually code this out, you could then go to the test route folder. Okay, cool. So that's like the basics of the dynamic based path routing. Thankfully, this is just going to be a single page app, so we're not going to have to do any of that, but I just wanted to explain that, yep, everything is going to live right here in this root folder. Okay, cool. So let's actually dive into another component real fast that's super important, is the layout. So the layout is actually what wraps around the entire basically this entire page. So what you can see is, let me scoot it over a little bit, but this layout is actually just going to wrap around this, basically the page. So everything that you're seeing on this page right now gets wrapped around this root layout right here. So we could come in here and do some styling, or really anything else we wanted to do, we could just wrap it around right here. Okay, but in our application, we really need to go ahead and just set up a few different components and pages to really stub out our application. And I think the best way to do this is to actually go ahead and look at the final application and just call out all the different components we're going to make, just so you can see it all in action before we go off and actually build it. So let me go ahead and show you guys the final application real fast. So just as a recap, here's what the final application looks like. So what I'm going to do is start calling out the different parts of the application, and then we're going to go just stub out those files that we need to make. So the first thing is we need to create this header up top. So this is just basically going to be where we're going to just have like the root of our application. And what we're going to do for this is we're going to come over here into our root of our project where it says NextJS. We're going to click new folder, and we're just going to call this our components folder. And then inside of here, we're going to go ahead and make a header component. One of the key parts of working with React and NextJS is the fact that you're going to put everything into self-contained components. That just makes your logic a lot easier and prevents you from making like one huge file that just has hundreds of lines of code in it. So what we're going to do first is go ahead and make our Header.tsx file. And like I said, this is what's going to be this top line. Okay, cool. We'll work on building that in just a second. The next thing that we need to work on is creating a few different components that are going to happen in this. Basically, we'll just call this like the root body of the application. So the first one that we're going to work on is creating what I'm going to call the input section. So that's right here and right here. I apologize for my ugly drawings, but I'm trying to show it to you guys. But basically what this input section is going to comprise of is an input field, an add button, and it's also going to house all the different companies and positions as we add them into our field by clicking add. So this is all going to get wrapped up. And the part that's cool is we'll write one input section component, and we'll get to reuse it basically right here, and we'll get to use it right here. So that's one of the nice parts about making components, is that reusable. So we're going to head back over to our components folder, and we're going to go ahead and create the input section.tsx. Great. And then we have to do a little bit more work. So the next component that we're going to work on is going to be our events detail component. Now this component basically just has the place where we're going to just store all of the strings and basically all of the data that our CrewAI is sending back to us from the backend. So all the raw text is going to go right there. So what we're going to do, come back over to the components folder, and we're going to create our EventLog.tsx. Fantastic. And that's going to go right there. And the very final component that we're going to work on is going to be this final output section. And that's where we're going to have that really nice looking JSON file where we're going to store, you know, all the research data that we do. So we can have the links for the articles and the links to the YouTube videos. So we're going to come back over here into our components folder and make our final one, which is just going to be called our FinalOutput.tsx. Okay, great. So that's where we're going to make all of our components, and we're going to start knocking these out one by one, starting with a header. And the very last thing that we have to do is we're going to use something called a hook. Now, don't worry, we'll basically explain this a lot more in detail when we get to it. But what needs to happen is we need to have one area where we're going to store all the information for the companies we add, the positions, and it's going to store the final output and the event details. So it's basically going to do all the heavy lifting for us of pinging our back end and saving the state for everything on our front end. So what I'm going to do is just call this one our useCrewJob.tsx. Now this is going to be a super important file, but we're going to get to that in just a minute. Okay, cool. So now that we've stubbed out all the different files that you can see are green, these are where we're going to be doing all of the major lifting for this application. So what I'm going to do is close this out, and what we're going to do is just a little bit more cleanup here in our main page. So we're going to clear all this up so that we can work towards making that final website that I just showed you just a second ago. So the first thing we're going to do is actually delete everything inside of our home file right here. So everything from this main going all the way down to the bottom main, you're just going to go ahead and delete it. And then inside of it, we're just going to create a div, and we're just going to call this the home page. So if we save that and then actually kind of rerun the application, open up our terminal again, npm run dev. Actually, you want to do a side by side so you actually can see what we're building as we do it. So let me go ahead, bring over another terminal window for you guys, or another website real fast. Here we go. Get this going up, and then everything's running on localhost 3000. So as you can see now, whenever it loads, it should just be a blank black page that says home. So now what we're going to do, come back over here, is we're just going to add some styling. And this is where we're going to start using Tailwind CSS. So we're just going to say class name, and then we're going to say, I want the background to be white. I want the minimum height of our main page to take up the entire screen. And I want the text on this application page to be black. Fantastic. So now whenever we come back over to our application, you can say, oh, it looks normal. And you can see that our Tailwind styles just took effect. Okay, great. Well, now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and actually move over to our header file that we created, because this one's going to be a super simple component that I want you guys to knock out. So what you can do is actually type in the commands RFCE. And what this will do is it will automatically create a React functional export component for us. And you just hit tab and it'll go ahead and create this, basically this template folder for you, or template file that you can show up in your application. Now, how the heck did I do that? Well, if you go over to your extensions and then type in basically React, what you'll do is you'll see that there's this file right here, this ES7 file. Well, what this does is it has snippets. So what you can do is just type in those shortcuts that I just did, and you can actually, basically import template React code into your application and make it super easy. So definitely install this if you haven't already. So what I'm gonna do, head back over here. Great. And now what we're going to do is just let's go ahead and knock out the rest of this logic for the header file. So what we want to do in here is, first off, we want to say we want the background of our final website to be black. So BG black. And then what we're going to do is have another div. And this extra div is basically where we're going to house our header. And this header is just, we want to make sure that we have a little padding on the left and right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we want this to take up MX auto. So basically, we want to position it in the middle and add some margin on the left and right. We want to add padding vertically of 4. So this is about 16 pixels. And then we want to add some padding x-axis, and we want to set this to 5, which is going to be about 20 pixels wide. Okay, great. And then inside of this, what we're going to do is go ahead and put our header, so our H1. And inside of our H1, we're just going to say NextJS Crew Tutorial. Fantastic. So what this is going to do is make sure we have a header, and what we can do next is actually make sure that this shows up properly. So we want the text on this to be white. We want the text on this to be super large, so 3XL. It's going to be about 30 pixels, and we want this to be bold, so font bold. Okay, this looks great. Now what we're going to do is try and get this header to pop up in our application. So this is actually going to be super straightforward. If you remember from just a minute ago, I said that layout folder is the one that wraps our main page. So what we can do is come in here and add our header above our body, so it'll show up on all of our pages. So what we can do is just come in here and we'll just type in header. Great. And then let's do this. And it's supposed to be header, capitalize. Header, yep, and you can see it's trying to import it from our components header. That looks great. So now if we come back over to application, you can see, fantastic, our header is now popped up on the top. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to head back over to our page, because this is where all of our root logic is going to be stored for, showing out where we want basically all the components in our application to show up. So we're going to do a little bit of styling. And then as we do a little bit of styling, we're going to start working on each component one at a time. So let's go ahead and start creating basically the container that's going to house everything inside of our application. So what we're going to do is just say div. And then inside of this div, we want it to be a flex div. This is basically going to allow us to do flex styling, so we can make sure things can show up in rows or columns. So we're just going to say flex. And then what we're going to do inside of this is we're going to work on our left column first, and then we're going to work on, which is going to be our input section. And then we're going to work on the right column last, which is going to be our output. So what we're going to do for our left column, I'll just add some comments so you guys can see it. Left column. And then this is going to be our right column. Great. So for our left column, what we want to do is we want to say class name is going to be equal to width, and we want this to take up 1/2 of the page, and we want to add a little bit of padding around it in the X and Y axis. So we're going to say P4. And now what we're going to do is go off and actually add in the input sections that we're going to create in just a second. So what we're going to do is say input section, and inside an input section, we're actually going to work with a few different fields. So I just want to show you what information we're going to pass into it before we build it. So the first one is going to be our title. So what do we want to call this input section? Well, we want to call it companies. And then what type of information do we want to have as the placeholder for our input field? Well, we want that to be, add a company. So we're going to say add a company. Great. And then what we're going to do next is we need to pass in some data. So we don't have this set up yet. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit of refactoring as we build, just so you can see how everything would work if you're building out a normal React application in real time. So what we're going to do is say data is equal to, and we'll just have some dummy data right now. We'll just put null right now. And then next we'll do is set data. And what set data will do is it will allow you to actually set the data that you're going to pass into here. So right now we'll just do an empty, basically an empty placeholder function. This doesn't mean anything right now. I just want to show you guys what it's going to look like, and then we're actually going to start building it out. So this is going to be our placeholder code for our companies. And then here's going to be our placeholder code for our positions. So positions, and then we're going to say add a position. Fantastic. So this is basically like where we're going to show up in the top left-hand corner where we can say, hey, add your companies and add your positions. All right. Well, before we move any more forward, let's go ahead and fill in these dummy placeholder codes that I just did for the data and the set data. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up top and we're going to start using something called state. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const companies, and companies are basically going to be an array of strings. So we're going to say use state. We're going to add that from React. And it's important because we're going to start using state. Anytime you start using state in a Next.js 13 or 14 app router application, you need to define that you're using client. And what that means is we need to we're basically going to be rendering this component on the client. And the reason we're doing that is because we want to like store state on the client. Fantastic. And if that doesn't make sense right now, don't worry. We're going to work with this more, so it'll hopefully make more sense later on. Great. So now we have our companies set up. So we'll actually go ahead and put those in here. So we're going to work with our companies. And then right here, we're going to pass in our set companies. And then for our positions, we're going to add positions here. And then down here, we're going to have set positions. Okay, so I've shown you how this works at a high level. We're going to pass stuff in, but now actually let's go ahead and start building in those input sections, just so a lot of this makes more sense. So let's head down here to our input section component. And then once again, we're going to type in RFCE. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to start stubbing out the code to make this generic reusable component so that we can actually add it to our homepage. So let's go ahead and start knocking this out. So the first thing I want us to do is go ahead and define the props that we're going to pass into this component. So let's actually minimize this, head back over to this page, and you can see what we want to do is we want to pass in a title, placeholder, data, and set data. Well, here's how we do that over here in React land. We're going to define an interface, and this interface is going to define what is going to be passed into this component. So we're just going to call it our input section props. And then inside of here, we're going to define everything that we want to do. So we want to have a title, placeholder. We want to have data. So in our case, that's going to be the positions or companies. And then we want to provide the ability to set the data. So every time you add or delete a company, we want to be able to basically call a function. And in React, whenever you're using state, it ends up looking like this. You're basically dispatching a set state action. So I knew that might be a little confusing, but as you get used to React more, this will make more sense. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And what we can do now is we can actually pass in our props down here, just like this. And now we can access them. So we can access our title, we could access the placeholder, we can access everything. Okay, cool. So what I want to do next is go ahead and actually stub out the different components and functions that we're going to use inside this component. So the first one is we want to be able to store the input value that the user's typing. So if we head over to the final application, this is right here, as the person's typing out a company or position, we want to be able to save that information. And what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to use state to store this information. So we're just going to call this the input value, set input value, and it's going to be a string. Let's go ahead and import that from React. That looks fantastic. We can actually go ahead and import these from React too, that we don't have to type React everywhere. And you'll just say update from React, update import from React. Fantastic. So that's looking great. So we have that set up. And now that we have our input value, let's go ahead and actually handle the two events that are going to happen inside of this component. The first one's going to be when the user clicks add. So what we're going to do for that function is do this. We're going to say const handle add click. So whenever someone clicks the add button, we want to handle that event. And what do we want to do? Well, in our case, what we want to do is first just do a little bit of cleaning up. So we're going to say if input value dot trim is equal, doesn't equal empty quotes, meaning that it's a not empty value. What we're going to do is we're actually going to update the data that's being passed in. So think of this as just like adding another company to the list. So we're going to say set data right here. And we actually have to grab it out of here, set data. So we're going to set the data. And what we're going to do, this is just React basically allows you to grab the previous data. And what we're going to do is append to it. So this is the spread operator. So think of this was like a list that looked like this, 1, 2, 3. What we're doing is putting another array in here but that spread operator is actually just going to like add the items in directly. Like instead of it being like 4, 5, 6, whenever you do the spread operator, it actually spreads out the item. So it makes it look like it's not an array, and it makes it just do that where they're all flat numbers. Okay, cool. So that's what's happening here when we're spreading the previous data. And at the end of that data, we're adding in our new input value. So that looks great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update the input field to be blank. That way the user can add in another company right after this. Okay, great. So that's how we're going to handle adding the click button. And the next thing is we need to create an event handler for whenever the user removes an item. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to say handle remove item. And then what we're going to do for this is we actually want to store the index that the user basically gives us. So this is going to be, if this was an array and they delete item number 3, we want to be able to delete that. So here's how we're going to do that. We're once again going to call set data. And what we're going to do is we're going to look through the data and we're going to filter it. And what we're going to do is we want to basically, this underscore is the data itself. The I is going to be the index. And what we want to do is we want to filter out all the data where the index of this doesn't equal the passed in index. So let me just write it out all the way so you can see what it looks like. So we'll do this. So, and we actually can do prev data, just so we can follow React best practices. Prev data. Fantastic. So yeah, so we're going to look through the previous data that's already being passed into us, and we're going to filter that array. And what we're going to do is pass back all the data in that array where the index of the current item we're looking at doesn't equal the index of the item we want to delete. So this is just a quick shortcut for deleting data. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do next is we're going to work on setting up this HTML code so that we can actually have nice looking inputs that look just like this. And I think the most helpful thing we can do is actually come back over here and look at the final output one more time and just really define what we're going to be doing. Well, what I see whenever I look at this input component is I see that we have basically a title up top, and below that title, we have an input area where on the left-hand side, we have an input. On the right, we have a button. And then below that, what we're going to do is actually add the ability to basically add companies over and over and over again. So we're basically going to need to make almost like a bulleted list or an unordered list to store all of the different companies that we want to look up, because this list just keeps on growing. Okay, so let's actually come back over here and start knocking that out. So the first thing we want to do is let's just go ahead and add some margin on the bottom of this so that we have space in between each one of our inputs. The next thing that I want us to do is come in here and we want to go ahead and add that title. So what we're going to do is this will actually just be a H2. And what we want in this H2, we can just go ahead and pass in the title. So we need to come back up here and we need to grab the title. Looks great. So now we have our title. Let's go ahead and style it a little bit. So in our case, we want the text to be extra large and we want the font to be bold. It looks great. And then what we're going to do back down here, well, this is going to be the area where, let's go and put some to-dos. This is where we're going to have the input. And then below this, this is where we're going to do our, our list of data. Okay, so for our input section, what we want to do is we want to use flex items once again. So we're going to say we're going to use the flex property. And then what we want to do is we want to say we want our items centered vertically. So, they look nice. And then what we're going to try and do after that is we're going to set some margin top to 2. So this isn't bumping up against our title. And then what we're going to do inside of this div is first, we want to go ahead and put the input. So this way it'll show up on the left. So we'll say input. And then what we're going to do, fantastic. Let's fix that. Input. So we're going to have an input, and then below that, we're going to have a button, and we'll fill these out with some styles here in a second. Button, add, great. Okay, so let's go ahead, and this should start slowly. Oh, I actually got to fix that real fast. What I'm going to do real fast for you guys is we're going to come back over here to our page, and inside of our page, I'm going to go ahead and import this input section. That way, as we're building it, we can actually see what's going on. And we're getting a quick error. It's saying this is not a compatible type. So if we come back over here to our input section, what you'll see, we didn't define the type for these. What we need to do up here, guys, is we need to say that this is a string array. And then down here, we need to say that this is a string array as well. Okay, fantastic. That was a quick type issue. But now when we come back over to our application, you can see like we have a rough outline of our input section. So let's keep chugging along and making them look nicer. So when it comes to our input tag, what we want to do is we want to say the type of this is going to be text. Then what we want to do is the value of this input section is going to be equal to our input value. And then whenever the user changes this input, what we want to do is actually set the input value to the value we just typed in. So this is event is E, and you can see that this is a HTML input element. So when you grab the target and the value, this is basically just, if you're not used to React, this is how you go about adding whatever value you type in here and press add. That's how you grab that value, E target value. Okay, cool. Then what we're going to keep doing is we want to set the placeholder for this to be equal to the placeholder that we're passing into our props. Fantastic. So we're going to say this is going to be equal to placeholder. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to update the class name, and this is where we're going to add in some styles. So we want to add some padding around it. We want to set a nice looking border, and we want the border to be gray 300, so you can hover over it and see that, it's a very nice faint gray. And then what we're going to do is we want to round it out. So this is just going to curve the sides of our input field like this. You can see they're not hard angles, they're nice and curved. So now that we have ours rounded, what we're also going to do is we're going to add some margin to the right so that the input doesn't hit the button to the right. And then we're also going to say flex grow. And if you look at what flex grow, all it does basically is it just takes up as much space as possible. Okay, cool. So look at that, guys. It looks awesome. So that's half of the input section done. Now let's go over here and start working on our button to make it look nice. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to handle whenever the person clicks on it. So we're going to say on click. What we want to do is trigger the handle add click function that we set earlier. So that's what we're going to do there. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to set the class name. And the reason we're going to do this is because we want to go ahead and style our button so it looks nice and green. So we want the background of our button to be green 500. Whenever you hover over the button, we want the background to be a little bit darker green. So background green 700. We want the text inside the button to be white, and then we want the font to be bold, and then we also want to add a little bit of padding around it, just so I'll show you what it looks like real fast. So you can see it doesn't look nice, so what we're going to do is add some padding real quick. So padding Y2, PX4, and then we're going to round it out. This makes our button look awesome. So that's fantastic, guys. So now let's come down here and actually start working on our list button. So line 43. Okay, cool. Oh, and real quick, I actually made a quick mistake. This isn't supposed to be a div. We actually need to change it to UL, which stands for unordered list, because, we're going to be listing through all of the elements that we pass in, the companies and positions and everything else. But what we're going to do in here is we need to iterate through all of the data that we pass into this component. So let's scroll back up to the top and add in our data, which is going to be nothing more than an array of strings. So now let's start mapping through that. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in data.map, and this is how we're going to map through the array. And what we're going to do inside of here is you're going to open up some parentheses, and then what we're going to do is define the callback function for the map. And I know that might be confusing, but basically like, hey, for each of the items in this array, what do you want me to do with it? Well, in our case, what we want to do is grab the item, and we want to grab the index. So you can see right here, that's what we're doing. So index. And then what we're going to do with this data is we're going to turn it into a HTML component. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want to map through each one of these items and turn it into a list item. So inside of here, we can just go ahead and show the item, and I'll show you what this looks like. That should be working. 1 second. Oh, as you can see, we're missing a key prop, so that's why it's throwing an error at us. So we can just say key is equal to index. Okay, now it should be working. So if we actually head back over to our application, you can see whenever we add a company, so let's just do test, it'll show up down here. So we're halfway there. Now we just need to make it look nice, just like this, and add the handle delete button. So here's what we're going to do next. We're going to add in some styling so this item looks proper. So we're going to say class name, and then we're going to, once again, use flex. And what we're going to do is we're going to center the items. We're going to justify between, which means I want you to put as much space between everything inside of this li tag. So I'll show you what's actually going to be in here. We're going to put a span, and this span is what's going to store the item. And then below that, or next to that, we're going to put the button, and that button is going to be where we're going to have the big X. So what this justify between does is it puts as much space to the left and to the right as possible. And what I'll do just to help you guys out, let's go ahead and actually put this side by side so you can see the code as we create it. Great, so that's looking good. So now that we have our justify between, what I'm going to do is put a little bit of padding on this, padding of 2 all around it. We're going to set the border on the bottom, and then we're going to set the border color to be gray 300. And what that'll do is put a little line under it, so it's starting to look nice. Okay, cool. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and update this button that we've created. In this button, if you remember, this is the X button where we're going to delete this company or position. So what we're going to do is we're going to, once again, create an on-click handler, and we're going to go ahead and call the function that we want to remove. So in this case, we're going to say, I want to handle removing the item, and I'm going to pass in the index, and this will actually go ahead and remove that for me. So if I just click it, I'll just show you that it works. Cool. So our delete is now working. Just to test it out again, so let's do Tesla, and let's do Apple. And now whenever I delete Tesla, it should show it. Fantastic. So we now know the logic is working, but now let's go ahead and update the style so it looks nice. So I'm going to do class name is equal to text red 500. So that should make it nice, bright and red. And then when you hover over this item, I want to change the text to a little bit darker red. So darker red 700. 700. So now when I hover, it'll change to a darker red. Okay, cool. That's looking great. So I'm pretty happy with the way this works and the way this looks. So now that we have set up our input section, let's go ahead now and let's make this a little bit bigger so everything's not overlapping. Let's go ahead and start working on the right side of this output section where we're going to go ahead and start setting up the final output components and the event details. So let's go ahead, close this out and start working on that next. And here we go. Fantastic. Let's open up the page. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and start working on this right column. All right, so let's go ahead and stub this out. So what we're going to do is inside of our right-hand column, what we want to do is go ahead and define some styles so that everything will look nice. And once again, what we're going to do is say the width of this is going to be 1/2 this way. It's going to take up the right half of the page. And we're basically just going to copy everything that we did for the left-hand column. So once again, we're going to set some padding to be equal to before. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to use flex and flex column. That way all the items inside of this container show up and down vertically. Just to remind you, whenever you go to the end result over here, you'll see everything is stacked on top of each other vertically. And that's just because we're doing flex column. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do inside of here is we're going to do a wrapper around the header of this output section. So this is going to be where we're going to show an H2 and the button to start running the class or running the crew. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a div in here, and this div is going to have an H2, and that's where we're going to go ahead and say that this is the output section. And below that, we're going to have a button, and that button is where we're going to go ahead and say start. But right now, if you notice, if we head back over here, that looks ugly. So let's go ahead and get that working. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the class name of this. Once again, we're going to start using flex, and this time we're going to use justify between again, which will make sure that items have as much spacing in between them as possible. And we're going to do item center, and then we're going to do margin bottom of 4. So this will put everything in a row and put as much space between them as possible. Great, that's exactly what we wanted. So now let's go ahead and add some styling to each one of these. For our H2, we want the text to be super large. So we're going to say text 2XL, and then we want the font to be bold. Great. Looking nice. And then now let's go ahead and make that start button look nice. So what we're going to do for this one is we want the styles to say, I want the background to be green. I want the hover background to be green 700, just like we've done beforehand. And then what we're going to do next is I want the text to be white. And then I want the font to be bold so people know to click it. Going to add some more styling so that we add some padding so that basically right now if we head back over here, let's actually save this so you can see what it looks like. So right now if I head back over here and let's make the green, that was my bad, green 500. So if I come back over now, you'll see that there's no padding around it on the x-axis. So if I come back in here, make that button finally look nice, we'll do px4. We're going to get some rounded in there so we don't have hard edges. And let's see if that looks good. Yeah, that looks fantastic. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way that looks like. And in a little bit, whenever we add some more logic, we're going to add an on-click event listener to start the crew. And then we're going to also disable the button whenever it's running. But we're going to work on that in a little bit. All right, let's keep adding some additional things. So what we want to do is just go ahead and add a to-do for, we want the final output component to show up top. So final output. And below that, what we want to have is our event log. So before we dive into each one of these, what we're going to do is actually start cleaning up and prepare for handling all of the logic that needs to occur inside of this application. Because right now we're going to store the state for the companies and positions, but we need to start doing some additional things such as like starting the run. Then we need to pass some final outputs over here and some more event logs out here. So this is going to get a little complicated. And instead of making this one page component super, super long, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start using a hook. So what we're going to do is, if you remember earlier, we made this use crew job hook. This is actually going to store all the logic for basically our entire application. So let me show you how we're going to go ahead and set up this crew job hook and actually, basically do some refactoring real fast. So let's go ahead and start real quick. And just in case this is your first time hearing the word hook, let me quickly explain what it does. And I'm going to compare this to a regular component. So when you look at a normal React component, like our input section component from beforehand, what you'll notice is it takes in some data, it performs, some state management, performs some functions, and then it returns some HTML. Okay, well, what a hook is going to do is it's going to, once again, take in some parameters. It's going to then store some state management. It's going to go off and, create some functions. But instead of returning HTML, it's actually going to return the state management, and it's going to return the functions that we create. So it's basically just a really nice way to tidy up all of our core logic and make it to where we can just pass it in to our other components super easily. And this will make more sense as we code this out. I just want to, if this is your first time hearing the word hook, I didn't want you to get super lost. So, okay, let's go ahead and start coding it up. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create our hook. So we're going to say export const, and it's, formal and best practices to start a hook off with the word use. So we're going to call this our use crew job. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to break this into 3 different sections. First is going to be our state section. That's where we're going to create all of our use states. Then we're going to start using something called our use effects. So I'm going to put that down here. This is basically going to be to where hey, if anything in our state changes, perform some additional logic. And then what we're going to do at the bottom is we're then going to pass in and create our functions. And then finally, we're going to return everything. So this is the outline for what we're about to work on next. So let's go ahead and start doing a little bit of refactoring. So when we head over to our page, what you'll notice is we had these companies and positions. Well, what we're going to do, delete those. We're going to put those over here in our use crew job. We're going to update our imports real fast, so things are looking great over here. Clean them up over here to keep our code nice and clean. And then obviously now we're going to get some errors because, hey, I don't have companies anymore and I don't have any, set companies. So here's how you can actually import a hook. So we're just going to say hooks, and then we're going to go ahead and import it. So we're going to say const crew job is equal to use crew job. Now this is going to pass back the crew we create, but in order to give this crew over here access to this state, we need to update our return statement. So this is super simple. All you're going to do is you're just going to say return, and then you're going to create an object. So just open up some curly brackets, and then just basically go ahead and pass in all of these. So your companies, set companies, positions, and set positions. So what's cool is what we can do now, and hopefully the light bulb's going off, is you can actually come back down here and you can type in you can type in crewjob.companies, and fantastic. You now have given this component right here access to the companies that we define over here. So it's just, like I said, it's going to be a really nice way to create one object that we can pass around that has all the information that we need in it. So let's go ahead and update all these. So crew job, and then finally we're going to say crew job. Okay, cool. So that's looking great. So let's go ahead and actually stub out a few more things in our hook while we have it open. Let's go ahead and make it full screen just so we can update a few of the bigger things that we need to do and just pass in some general information. So what you and I are going to try working on next is we are going to set up the events section. So as our crew sends back, hey, I just found this information on the internet, we need somewhere to store it. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to create an area for us to store that event information. So we're going to do event, set event. And what you're going to notice is I have this as type string. That's incorrect. You and I need to actually create a new type to store the information we get back from our backend. And this is going to be we'll just call it event type. And what we're going to do for this event type is it's going to mimic the data that we have coming from our backend. So we're going to create a new type up here. We're going to call it event type. And the only information we're going to put in it is the data. That's going to be a string. And then we're going to have a timestamp. And this is also going to be a string. So let's go ahead and update that. Great. So that's looking great. And the other thing is we want to also pass in and store the final position information list. So what am I talking about here when I say this? Well, if you go back to our backend code and look at the API and then come all the way down here and look at what we're returning, well, this is, like I said, for the event data type, the timestamp and data, that's exactly what we had right here, data, timestamp. So that looks clean. But when it comes to the final result, if you remember, we're returning a JSON object. And what's this JSON object going to look like? Well, if you head back over to our models, it's going to look like this. It's going to be a position info, but the final output is going to be a list of those position outputs. So that's exactly what you and I need to define over here on our front end code. So let's just go ahead and type it up. So we're going to say export type, and we want to create position info. And then what we're going to do is just copy all the information that you just saw right in here. Company, position, name, blog articles, all of this is going to get copied over. So let's go ahead and type it up. So company, is going to be a string. Position is also going to be a string. The name of the person in that position is going to be a string. And then the blog article URLs is also going to be a string. So URLs, this is going to be an array of strings. That was my bad. And then if you remember, when it comes to the models for the YouTube, it was actually a little bit more tricky. It was a named URL, which consists of a name and a URL. So we also need to set that up too real fast. So export type, and we're going to call this named URL. And this is just going to have the name as a string, and then it's going to have the URL as a string. That looks great. So now we can actually go ahead and pass in and create our YouTube interviews URLs of type named URL, and it's going to be a list of them. All right, that looks fantastic. So now back down here, now that we set up all those different types, what we can do is actually start making use of them. So what we can do is just say position info, and then we can do set position info, set position. I don't know why I put a capital in there. So set position info a list, and this is going to be equal to use state, and we're basically going to use this type, but it's going to be an array of them. Okay. That looks great. So I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking right now. The other thing that I said we want to do is whenever the user goes off and clicks that start button over here, we want to change the state of that to be running. That way we can update the text to, show nicely and show some responsiveness. So we're going to go ahead and create that state right here. So we're going to say set running, and that's going to be a Boolean, and we're just going to set it to false by true because it's obviously not going to start running right out the gate. And then the other thing that I want to pass in here is going to be the current job ID. And we'll discuss this more in a minute, but whenever you start a job, whenever we start running the crew in the backend, if you remember, what's it going to return to us? Well, it's going to give us back a job ID. So we need to be able to store it somewhere on the front end. So we're just going to set it up and store it right here. So then we're going to say set current job ID. And by default, we're just going to set this equal to an empty string. Okay, cool. Well, go ahead and give yourself a pat on the back because setting all this up is a little bit tedious. But now that we have all of our data types set up, it's going to make our life super easy as we go off and create our new functions and all of our use effects. Okay. So what I would like for us to do now is go ahead and handle the process of starting a job. So what are we going to do whenever the user clicks this start job button? Well, let's talk about it real fast and let's create it so we can start stubbing out what we want to do as we create it. So the first thing that we want to do whenever we start a job is we want to clean up the old job. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make a request to our backend Python environment. So that's where we're going to go off and say like, hey, I'd like to start a new job based on these companies in these positions. And then the last thing we want to do is update our state. Basically we want to say like, oh, hey, I just started this job ID. So we want to be able to save that. So save our state, and I'll just say job ID. Okay, so this is the direction we're taking it. So let's go ahead real fast and start stubbing these out one by one. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and clear up our old events. So we're just going to set the events array to empty. So that's just going to be us cleaning it up. The next thing we're going to do is same thing, clean up the old position list. So we're going to clean up any old results. And the final thing is we're going to say like, hey, I am running a new job now. So we're going to say set running to true. Okay, cool. Now, when it comes to making our request to our backend, well, this is going to be a little bit different if you haven't used it before. What we need to do is we need to install a new package called Axios. So what you can do is come down to your terminal and type in npmi Axios, and this will go off and install the Axios library. Now what Axios does is it makes it super easy to set up sending requests and to a backend. So you can send a GET request, POST request, and then it'll help you basically structure the response you get back. So let me show you what I mean. So what we can do is say const response is equal to, and let me close it out, and we'll just say we're going to await it. And anytime we make anytime we await a call, we need to set our function to be asynchronous. And basically that just means this call is going to run asynchronously just in the background. But what we need to do is await our request to our backend. So what we're going to do, that might not have made a ton of sense. So let me just re-describe that real fast. Whenever you are working with JavaScript and TypeScript, you have the ability to make function calls asynchronous. And basically what that means is they're not going to block anything. So other code can continue to run after this gets called. But whenever you're working with asynchronous functions, you sometimes want to wait for things to happen. So in our case, we want to wait for our backend response to get back to us. Okay, so that's what we're doing here. But what we're going to do is we actually want to be making a request to a specific endpoint. So we have set up our code on our backend to run on port 3001. So here's how we're going to access it. We're going to say, hey, I want to make a request to HTTP localhost port 3001. And if you remember, if you go back over to our backend code where we set up our crew, you can see down here at the bottom, we're making a request to port 3001. So that's why we did that. All right. And we actually want to specifically make a request to the API crew endpoint. All right. And what do we want to pass to this backend function? Well, we want to pass our companies and we want to pass in our positions. So that's how we're going to get our front end to pass in information over to our backend. Now, what's cool about using Axios is you can actually go ahead and define the type that you expect the response to be. So if you look over here at our API crew function, you can see whenever we make a post request, you can see that we expect to get back a job ID. So here's how we handle that over here. We're going to say, I expect when making a post request, I expect the return data to have a job ID, and I expect this to be a string. Great. So that's how that's going to work. And what's important though is when you make requests to a backend, it's not always guaranteed to work. So it's best practice to go ahead and wrap this in a try statement to say like, hey, let's try to make this request. And if something goes wrong, what we need to do is we need to handle it in a catch statement. So we're just going to do something like this and say, hey, I want to catch the error. Let's log it. And then let's also set the current job ID to, empty because, hey, something must have gone wrong. Okay, but let's go back and handle the happy case when everything works. Well, what we expect to happen is we want to go ahead and let's log the response so we can just see what was happening. And then what we want to do is we want to set the current job ID, and I'll just show you the autocomplete. So we want to grab the response. We want to grab the data from the response. And then you can see, because we defined the type up here, we can go ahead and grab that job ID. So that looks great. Now, what I want to do before we dive off and actually go ahead and start running this, what I want to do real fast is we need to make two changes. The first one is whenever we start a new job, I want to give some feedback to the user to say like, hey, we successfully kicked off this job. And there's a really nice package to do this, and it's called React Hot Toast. So we're going to install that real fast. So npm React Hot Toast. So that's going to take a few more seconds to install. But once it's done, what we can do is we can say toast.success start job. And what this will do is it'll add a nice little green pop-up on the top of the user screen to let them know like, hey, it worked. But if it fails, what we also want to do is basically paste in an error. So we'll toast an error saying job failed to start. This way, we're going to give back some feedback to our users. And in order to actually have this pop up successfully, you need to open up your layout file, and inside of your layout file, what we're going to do is below the children is we're going to add a toaster. So you can see it comes from React Hot Toast. And what this will do is it'll make sure there's a nice little pop-up. So this is going to import all the styles and all the logic for using React Hot Toast. Okay, but that might have been a lot. So let's go ahead and actually try and set this up in action. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here to our code, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually start our local backend server on the right hand side. So you can see right now I'm in the Next.js application. So I want to get out of that and I want to change directory over to our other server. So we're going to change it over to our CrewAI backend. So let's go ahead and go over there. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run our server. And this is nothing new. I'm just going to type in Python api.py, and this should go ahead and try starting it. And 1 second. Oh, it didn't start it. And the reason why is because I'm not in the right Python environment. So what I'm going to do is type in the word poetry shell, and this should go ahead and actually start it. Fantastic. So now you can see it's off and running, and you can see I'm now in this environment. So now whenever I type in Python api.py, it'll go ahead and actually start triggering and running that server in the backend. Okay, fantastic. So it's set up, and we're going to get an error when we run this because we don't have our cores configuration set up, but I just want to go ahead and show you our app in action. So let's head back over here to our local host. Oh, and it's actually definitely not going to run because I was running our Next.js server right here. So let's kill that. Let me come back over here, restart this again. This is live debugging, guys. So sorry about that. Okay, cool. So now this is running on the right port. So now if I add Tesla, add it. Now if I add CEO, add it. And then what I'm going to do is we need to wire up our start function real fast, just so you can guys see this in action. So what we need to do is come down here. We need to say start job. And what we're going to do is if we head back over to our page, what we're going to do is whenever the user clicks that start button, we need to just say like, hey, you actually need to call the start job button that we just passed in. So all you have to do, super straightforward, you're just going to do an on-click event. So on-click, and then we're going to call the crew.job, and we can call start job. So hopefully you can see now, like, man, this hook makes our life so much easier, and this code super, super clean. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and refresh the page. Once again, add Tesla, and then add CEO, add, and then now what we're gonna do is click start. So what this should do, it'll say job failed, and that's what we expect. And the reason why is you'll notice it says, hey, making a request to this endpoint has been blocked due to a CORS policy. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna head back over to our Python code. We're gonna open up our api.py file. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to update our CORS policy. Now, if you haven't heard of CORS policy before, basically it stands for like cross-origin resource scripting. And basically it's a way that we want our backend to say like, hey guys, it is okay for other websites to use the data that I generate. And it's super simple to add. All we're going to do is below our application, we're going to create a new CORS policy. So I'm going to type in the word CORS, and we actually need to go ahead and import CORS as well. So we're going to come up here and we're just going to say from Flask CORS, import CORS. That's us setting it up properly. And what we're going to do is we now need to define which application we want to use CORS. So we want our app right here to use CORS. And then we can define basically which resources are allowed to use this. So we want to say, hey, anything on the API endpoint, I'm going to apply this CORS policy to. And all this is saying is like, hey, literally anyone can use this backend that I'm creating. So that's what it's defining. So now if we come back down here, we can see our Flask application has reloaded. So if I come back over here, refresh the page, once again, add Tesla, add the position CEO, and then I now add a start request. It now says the job started. So guys, this is actually working. You are now connecting the front end to the back end. They're talking to each other. The back end just gave us a job ID. If we come back over here and look at our Flask application, you can see that our crew is off and running. It's like, oh, I'm finding blog articles. I'm looking on YouTube. So like, seriously guys, this is awesome. I know we just did a lot, but you have actually connected the front end to the back end. And now we're in the home stretch where we're going to start finally connecting and capturing the data that the backend is generating for us. Okay, cool. So I'm going to stop this backend application real fast just because, you know, hey, we got to save those pennies. All right. So what we're going to do next, now that we have got our API application up and running, we're going to head back to our use crew job. And now we finally have this set up. So that is a lot of work, but let's go ahead and start knocking out the next part of this application, which is where we're going to start handling some of the use effects. And what we're going to try and do in these use effects is we really just want to have one job. Let me explain it, what we want to happen. Whenever our application is running and we get back a job ID, we want to, from that point forward, continually ping our backend to say like, hey dude, I see the job is running. What's the status of it? And then we're just going to continually, every second, we're just going to ping the backend server over and over and over again until we get back a state of complete where we know the job is finished, or we get back a status of error. And we're going to just continually ping it. And we're specifically going to be hitting that. Let me show you the api.py. We're going to be hitting that GET request right here. And this is where we're going to get back the status of the job. So that's what we're going to do inside of our use effect. So let's go ahead and start knocking out that use effect real fast. So here's how we're going to create this use effect. First, we're just going to say, hey, here's a use effect. Then what we're going to do is go ahead and open it up. And then whenever you create a use effect, you have to tell it, hey, what different properties do you want me to run this use effect on? So basically anytime something changes, it will know to re-trigger this use effect. So in our case, I want this use effect to trigger every time the current job changes. Okay, well, going back to our logic from beforehand, what do we want to have happen? Well, what we want to do is if the current job does not equal, so current job does not equal null, meaning we have an active job ID, what we want to do is go ahead and actually set an interval to start pinging the backend. What we're going to do, I know that might have been a little bit weird, but what we're going to do is say interval ID is equal to set interval. And set interval is just a way to go ahead and say, hey, I want you to perform this function on a set interval. So in our case, what we're going to do is say, hey, I want you to run the function that we're about to create called fetch job status. And I want this to run every 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds. And you're going to get a little bit error, like a type-wise. So just put this and it'll work for you. Okay. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and create that function. So we're going to say const fetch job status. and this is giving me another asynchronous function. And then we also need to create that interval ID because we haven't declared it yet. So we're going to say let interval ID equal to number. Okay, cool. So this is us stubbing out this use effect. And just to recap, we are going to, every time we know the current job ID isn't equal to null, meaning we have a job ID, we're going to start trying to fetch that job status. And we're just going to keep pinging the backend over and over and over again. Well, here is how we're going to do that. Inside of this fetch job status, what we're going to do is we're going to, once again, use Axios to make a request to the backend. So we're going to say const response is equal to await Axios, and this is going to be a GET request, and we're going to make a GET request to, our Python backend. But we're going to do it a little bit fancy. And what I mean by that is we're going to use backticks, because backticks are going to allow us to pass in, basically do some string interpolation. So here's what I mean by that. We're going to do HTTP localhost 3001, because that's where it's running. We're going to make a request to the API crew endpoint, but more specifically, we are going to pass in the job ID. And that's what's going to get triggering this right here. So that's why we're doing that. And then whenever we get back a request, it's up to us to go ahead and define what do we expect to get. Well, we expect to get a status, which is going to be, started, completed, or error. We expect to get back some results, and those results are going to be formatted in a positions information list. So it's really just going to be positions, and it's going to be an array of positions info. And then finally, what we expect to get back is a list of events, also for events type. So let's move that down. Oh, wrong array. Let me get that. And then down here, what we're going to do is say events, and events are going to be of type event type. Okay, cool. So this is how we're going to make a request to our backend, make a GET request, and this is how we're going to define what type of data we expect to get back. All right, this is looking good. So what we're going to do next is let's just, for safety measures, let's go ahead and log what we're getting back from the backend. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start updating our fetched events. So this is going to be, all the information that the crew went off and researched. We're going to start saving it. So we're going to say set events, and this is going to be equal to our fetched events, which are going to come from right inside of here. And here's how we can actually, update that. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of something called destructuring. And what we can do is we can say, I want to grab all of the data inside of our response.data, and I want to actually just grab these events one by one. So in our case, we can grab the events, we can grab the results, and we can grab the status, just like that. And then we're going to get a little bit fancy. You guys are going to be TypeScript experts by the end of this, but you can actually rename the data that you get back when you're doing destructuring. So we're just actually going to rename our events to fetch events. So fetched events. And the reason we want to do that is because, if you look up here where we're defining all of our state, we say events here. So we just don't want to run into a name conflict. So that's why we rename it here. Okay. So what we're going to do is, now that we've got back all the data from our backend, we're going to start saving it in different places. So for our set events, this is where we're going to pass in our fetched events we just grabbed. So that's those. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, I know sometimes whenever you finish, you will have a result. So if you do have a result, what I want to do is, that's my bad. I meant to say results, singular, not plural. That was my bad, result. So if you do have a result, what I want to do is, first off, I want to log it. I want to see what information you got back from the backend. So that's what we're going to do first. And then what we're going to do is I want to set our position information list, and I want to go ahead and pass in the array that we get back. So if you remember, if you look at what result it gets back to us, it gives us back a property called positions, and it's nothing more than an array of position info. So that's what we're doing here. So I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, and I've gone a little fast, feel free, please drop some questions down below. I will be super happy to answer. And if you want a more detailed response, once again, just head over to the Skool link. It's completely for free, and I'll actually have a post for this specific video. So if you have a question, there's probably another chance someone else had the same question. So it's a great resource to learn a lot more, and you'll also meet some cool AI developers over there too. So, all right, so we're going to keep chugging along. So what we're going to do is put this in here. And what we're going to do, just in case something goes wrong, because if you remember in our api.py, what we're going to do is we're going to try and grab the results. Sometimes it might not work. So if the data we get back doesn't work, hey, let's just keep it as an empty array just to make sure we don't run into any weird errors. Okay, now let's keep chugging along. If you remember earlier, I said we want to continually fetch the backend jobs until we run into one of two states, either complete or error. And at that point, we know the job is done and we can stop pinging the backend. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say if the status is equal to complete, all caps, or the status is equal to error, what I want to do is I want to first off clear the interval ID. And just to prevent some weird edge cases, let's just go ahead and wrap it like that. That looks great. And then the next thing I want to do, I want to set the running to false. Because if you remember, we're going to go update our button over here in just a minute. So that is how we can let the front end user know that we're done running the job. And then finally, what we're going to do is let's just add another toast notification to say, hey guys, the job successfully ran. So toast.success, and we're going to say job completed. Okay, cool. Now, if you remember earlier, I said whenever we make a request to a backend, it might not always work. And what we need to do is sometimes put it in a try catch statement. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to grab all that code we just created, cut it out, and put it inside this catch statement, or this try statement. So this is, hey, this is the happy path if everything goes great. But if it doesn't, what we want to do is, log that the error happened. We want to set the current job ID to empty because, hey, it failed. We want to let the user know also that it broke. And the final thing we want to do is we want to clear the interval ID just because we don't want to keep pinging and letting this job run over and over and over again. All right, so this is looking fantastic. So I'm pretty happy with the way this use effect is set up. And what we're going to do next is we're going to update all of the return items down here at the very bottom to include all the new information we just created. And that way we can pass it back to our front end so we can start using it. So we're going to say running, we're going to pass in events, we're going to pass in position info. And then the other thing that we're going to pass in is we're going to pass in, we already passed in start job. So I'm pretty happy with this the way this looks. So let's hop back over to our page. And now we're going to start finally going back to building out some front end code. And we're going to work on these two items. But before we do that, I just want to show you one other thing. We can make our front end button a little bit responsive. So here's what we can do. We can say, hey, I want this button to be disabled. So disabled if the crew job is running. So now we have access to that running property. And then what we can also do, being a little bit more fancy, we can say, hey, if the crew job is running, I want the button text to say running. Otherwise, it can say start. And let's add some dots so it looks nice. But yeah, all right, this is looking cool. So you've added some more responsiveness to your front-end application, pat on the back. But what we're going to do next is we're going to start working on this event log component, and then we're going to start working on that final output component. So let's go ahead and open it up, event log. All right, let's go ahead and start knocking this out real fast. And just as a quick reminder, here's exactly what we're building looks like. It's just going to have a title up top that says event detail. And then below that, it's just going to be a box where all of our events are just going to pop up one on top of each other and have a timestamp up to the top left. So let's go ahead and start building it. Well, per usual, we're going to type in RFCE to go ahead and create our new function. And then inside of this, what we're going to do is, if you remember, whenever we want to pass in any data to this, we need to go ahead and set up some props. So in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to make an interface called event log props. And the only thing that we're going to be passing into this is going to be events. And this event type is going to get pulled from basically our component that we made in our hooks. If you remember over here in our hooks, we went ahead at the very top and we defined this event type right here. So let's go ahead and export it so we can gain access to it over here in our other code. Now, if I hit command period, you can see the quick fix says import it. All right, great. So this is looking awesome. Now we can set it up right here to say, pass in our event log props. And now I can access our events. Okay, so we're properly passing in events to our React functional component. Now let's go ahead and start updating this code so it works properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to start adjusting some of our styles. So we're going to say the class name of this is going to be flex, and we're going to do flex column because we want all of the event logs in here to be stacked on top of each other vertically. And we want the height of this component to be full. So you can see H full means height 100%. Okay, now what we're going to do is we want to define a header to show that this is basically our event details section. So event details. And one of the things I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and put this event log over here just so you can see it as we build it. So I'm just gonna say event log. There we go. And then it's going to fail or give us red squigglies because we're not passing in the proper information. Yep, property events is missing on the type. So all we have to do is say events is equal to crew job.events. All right, everything's looking happy. And if we come back over here and we'll start to see, all right, our header is popping up. Things are looking great. So let's go ahead and start adding the box below this to where we're going to be passing in all of our different events. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a wrapper for it. And this is going to be the gray box around it. So it's going to be a div. And inside of this div, we want, like I said, it's going to be the gray border box. So what we want to do is we're going to say flex. And then we're going to say, we're going to say flex grow. And that's going to say, hey, take up as much space as you need. Then we're going to set some overflow, which is basically going to be like, hey, as we start passing in a bunch of events, this is going to grow. And if it gets too big, start trimming some of it off or make it scrollable. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say border of 2. So that's going to be, you know, to say, hey, we're going to have a border and I want the border to be gray and I want it to be gray 300. And let's add some padding to it so that our events don't hit the sides. And if we come back over here, you can see we have a nice gray border box that we just created. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to start working with our events. And what we're going to do is we are going to set up a ternary. Now, if you haven't heard of that word before, basically what it means inside of TypeScript is you can have a condition. So in our case, hey, do we have any events? So are the events equal to 0? Is the array length equal to 0? If so, I want you to load some text saying, hey, I haven't found anything. Otherwise, I want you to basically list out all the events. So I'm going to say list events. Otherwise, this is just going to go ahead and say no events. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to return a p tag that says no events, and then let's delete that comment. And then in the case when we do have a bunch of events, we are going to map through them like we have done in the past. So we're going to say events.map, and we're just going to let autocomplete work for us for a second. Inside of here, what we're going to do is go ahead and add in our HTML code that we want to render whenever we do have an event. So we're going to set up a div. That div is going to have a key, and we also want to go ahead and add some styles to it. So let's start working on this one at a time. So we're going to say the key for this is the index. For the styles, we actually want to add some padding around this event and the other events. We want to add a border on the bottom, and we want this border to be gray. This is just going to add some separation for us between our events so we can clearly tell which event is which. That's looking fantastic. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to set up a p tag. Now this p tag is going to actually show our timestamp, and it's going to show our event data. Now here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to go ahead and open up our event type, and we're going to pass in our timestamp. And then we're going to do a colon, and to the side of that, we're going to pass in the event dot and then data. So this is going to just make it look nice and clean, show a timestamp on the left and then our data on the right. So this is exactly what we need to do to get our event log up and running. But now what I want to do is actually show you guys that this is actually working in action. So what I'm going to do, come back down here. We're going to spin back up our Python backend Flask application. So I'm going to start that. Our front end's working. All right, everything looks good. So let's go ahead and start trying to run it and maybe do a little bit of debugging at the same time. So if I type in Tesla and then I type in that I want to get information about the CEO, what I would like to happen whenever I click start is I would like to start seeing event details pop up. So let's go ahead and try this out. And it might take a little bit of time, but you can see it'll work. All right, so first things first, you can see that we can see all the data, like we kicked off the crew, so it's popping up, so we know event details are working. And what we'll do next is we'll wait for some additional logs to pop up. Now, this is where we'll start to see the logs pop up down here. It'll take a few seconds, but we'll come back right whenever it pops up its first details. So let's give it a few seconds. Okay, so it took a few seconds, but as you can see, we are successfully capturing event logs from our backend database, and this is looking fantastic, but we actually are running into a small error that we need to fix. If you hop back over here to our logs, you'll see that when it comes to setting out our timestamps, we were running into a quick issue. And that's because we were importing the wrong date time. So what we should have done is we should have said from datetime, import datetime. So that'll fix that issue right here when we were calling datetime.now. And the other issue that I want to fix is back in our event logs. What you'll notice is out here, we are basically making the fonts semi-bold, and that's not what was supposed to happen. So what we should do is in this p tag area, we should just delete it. And this will make the text look much more clean and not bold for no apparent reason. The other thing is when it comes to our H2, what we should have done is this text should have been semi-bold. So what we should have do here is do class name, and then we'll do text large, just with LG, font semi-bold, and then we'll do MB bottom 2, and this will actually add some padding. So now this is larger and we have a gap between our event details and our border. Okay, cool. So everything is working now. So what we're going to do next, now that we have our event details working, is we are going to start working on our final output component. And this is going to be the last major component we work on inside of this application. So what we're going to do is open up our final output component and start coding this up real quick. And just as a quick recap, here is what the final output should look like. We should once again have some text up top and then a border. And then inside of this, we should list out each one of the position infos where we have the company name, position, name, blog articles. And for the blog articles and the YouTube interviews, we actually want these to be a bulleted list so that the person can go in here and click on them and either read the articles or watch the YouTube videos. Okay, so now we've got that out of the way, let's go back and start coding this up and getting it working inside of our own application. So what we're going to do, per usual, is go ahead and do RFCE to create that React functional component. And then we need to define what we're going to pass into this component. By this point, hopefully you guys are starting to see the pattern and getting used to this. And what we're going to do in here is we are going to pass in the position info list. And this is going to be a list of position info items. So and we can go ahead and import it from our useCrew job. And this is going to be an array of them. That looks great. And then what we can do down here is we can define our props. And now I have access to that position info list that we pass in. Awesome. So as we build it, let's go ahead and come back over here into our page. And we're going to go ahead and add that final output. And we're going to pass in the position info. And let's get it working. So it's position info list. So let's update that to say position info list. And as you can see, no red squiggly marks. Everything is looking great. And if we actually head over to our application and refresh it, well, we don't even need to refresh it. You can see right here, we have our final output. So let's keep coding along and get it actually set up. So let's open up final output and let's go ahead and describe what we want to happen. Well, it's going to look very similar to the event details where it's going to be in a column where we're going to have final output up top. Then we're going to have our border and we're going to have all the information in it. So it's going to look very similar to the event details, except we're going to do a little bit more fancy stuff when it comes to making it where we can click on the blog articles and YouTube videos. So let's get this working. First, when it comes to our outer div, what we want to do for setting up our styling is we want to set up a flex column and we want this to take up the entire height. So h full to take up 100% of the height of this element. And then we're going to set up our h2. And this is where we're going to say this is our final output. That looks great. And then what we're going to do inside of here is I can go ahead and type in the class name for this. And we want the class name to be text large. And what we want to do is we basically want to copy the same as the other one. We want the font to be semi-bold and we want to add some spacing around it vertically. So we're just going to say my2. So that's going to add some spacing above it and below it. And now we're going to start creating that border box that's going to go below it. So here's what we're going to do in this one. We're going to say we want this to flex grow to take up as much space as possible. We want overflow to go auto so we can scroll through our elements. We're going to set border to 2 so we have a solid border. And per usual, we want the border to be gray 300. And lastly, we want to set up a little bit of padding so our outputs aren't hitting the sides of our border. So if we go back, you can see we now have a nice little box that we're about to start filling in. Okay, so what we can do next is we're going to do, once again, another ternary. And in this ternary, we're going to check to see if the position info list length is equal to 0. If it is, we want to let the person know, hey, I don't have anything yet. Otherwise, I want to go ahead and render all of those positions. So in the case they don't have a job results yet, we're just going to do a p tag and we're going to say no job results yet. And then now we're going to dive into the fun stuff where we're going to map back through all of our positions. So position info list, we're going to map through it. So map, and then we're going to do position and we're going to do index exactly like we normally do. And then we're going to go ahead inside of here in this return arrow function, we're going to go ahead and define all of the HTML that we want to show to the user. Okay, so inside of this, what we want to do is first off, we want to style it a little bit and we want to give it a key. So the key is going to be equal to the index. And then we're going to give it some styles and we're going to give it really just a little bit of margin on the bottom so that there's room between each one of the results. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and put inside of here the company name and everything else that we basically have collected about the user, basically the positions inside of the company. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a p tag. And this first p tag is really just going to have the company name. So we're going to say strong. So that's how you make something bold. And then we're going to say company and then colon to the right of that, we're going to then put in the capitalized first letter. So this is a function that I've come up with. Let's go ahead and create that real fast. But basically, we just want to capitalize the first letter of the company because sometimes CrewAI will return stuff in lowercase for some reason. So let's just quickly make this function real fast. So we're going to say const capitalize first letter. We're going to pass in a string and it's going to give us back a string. So we're going to say return string. Grab the first character and add it to upper, and basically, yeah, grab the string and for the first character, basically make it an uppercase letter and then add the rest of the string. So it's just a quick swap to capitalize the first letter. Then what we're going to do is then pass in, so capitalized first letter, and then we're going to pass in the company name. Okay, great. So this is how we're going to do it for company, and we're basically going to copy this for position. So we're going to come down here. Oh, it didn't like that. I just meant to copy this p tag right here. There we go. Then we're going to add the position. So position, and this is where we're going to do position.position, just like that. That looks great. And then we're going to do the person's name, but I found this one always comes back capital, so we don't really need to worry about it. So we're going to do P, once again, strong name, and then below that, we're going to put in position.name. Now, one thing that you do have to do when working with React to put a space between name and position name to make sure that they're not like on top of each other is you have to basically do a curly brackets and a space. This will add a space in your output. So this is just a nice way to style it real fast. So let's add this everywhere. Great and great. All right, well, now that we've gotten the positions and everything else out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to setting up our blog articles. So what we're gonna do inside of here is we're gonna make a new div, and this is where we're going to list all of the person's blog articles for that specific position. And what we're going to do is do a strong tag, and we're going to say blog articles URLs. And then what we're going to do is add in an unordered list. So UL, that stands for unordered list. And then we're going to map through the results. So we basically are going to have a map in a map. And this is totally acceptable. And I just want to show you guys how we're going to set it up. So we're going to say positions.blogarticles map, and we're going to map through each one of the articles. And before we do that, though, we want to do a normal check like we've done with everything else. So a ternary statement. So we're going to do position.blogarticle URLs. And we're going to say, hey, if the length of this article is over 0, what I want to do is I want to say and go ahead and map through it. Otherwise, I want to return a p tag that says no blog articles. So that's all we want to set up for here. Why is it not happy? I think I have... One second, I think we just need to set this up too. Yeah, that's all. It was just upset we didn't have a div, but so this is where we're going to map through all of them. So we're going to say position.blog articles, and we're just going to map through each one of them. And inside of here, this is where we're going to do a list item. So the list item is going to have a key, and then we're going to make an anchor tag. Let me just walk through it. We're going to go through each one of these. And it looks like it's upset because I put that extra parenthesis right there. I shouldn't have done that. So this is all the code should have been. So let me save it. And yeah, now things are looking better. So what we're going to do is we're going to map through each one of the blog article items, create a list item where the key is going to be equal to the URL index, or just the index right here. And then we're going to make an anchor tag. And an anchor tag is how you can make something clickable on our website. So anytime someone clicks this, they're going to be redirected to the URL of the blog article. We're going to set the target equal to blank. And that means whenever they click it, it's going to take them over to a new tab. So it's going to open a new tab. And then now what we're going to do is update the style to say green 500. And whenever we're just going to go ahead and underline it so it looks nice and clean. And what we want to do is for inside this list item, we just want to go ahead and show the URL as the text that the person sees whenever they're looking at this. Okay, so let's go ahead. It looks like I was missing another brace, but yeah, so this is how we're going to list through all of the blog articles. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to recreate this for basically our YouTube interviews. So I'm just actually going to copy and paste this all right here, copy, paste, and we're just going to re-update it, some of the text in it. So for this section, for our strong section, we are just going to say YouTube interviews. And then inside of here, instead of mapping through the blog article interviews, we're going to map through the YouTube interview URLs. And then what we're going to do is, as we're mapping through them, is we're first going to do a normal check to say, hey, is the interview length greater than 0? If it is, what we're going to do is basically perform the map. So we're going to say YouTube interview URLs.map. And this time, if you remember, it's not just a URL. If you remember, it's going to include the name of the YouTube video and it's going to include the URL to it. So if we type in video.url, that's what we'll pass here. And right here, we'll type in video.name. So it'll actually show the title to the user right here. So that looks great. And then we're also going to say, if the person doesn't have any YouTube videos, we'll just say no YouTube videos yet. Okay, so this is looking great. So what we're going to do now that we have set up our final output function is we're going to go ahead and rerun this job. And I'm just going to show you guys the results as it shows up. So we're going to do Tesla as the company, and then we're going to add the position as CEO. We're going to go trigger our job. This should start it. Job started. We're going to see now we have our event details and we have our nice little border on the bottom to help separate between all the event details. Now this is going to take a few seconds to run. And if you hop back over here, you can see that it's off running per usual. We're looking up articles about Elon Musk and everything else that he's doing right now. So this is going to take a few seconds to run, but what we're going to do is we're going to let it run and we'll come back and look at the final output together. And the other thing that I think is pretty cool is you can see that it's running. So this is how we were managing our state earlier to detect if our job was running. We're actually doing it right here. So we're going to come back in just a second once it's finally done spitting out the final output. Hey guys, so it actually finished running, but then it threw an error, and I want to walk you through why we were getting that error. So if you look on line 57, it was saying that this was undefined. Our YouTube interviews URLs were undefined, which is odd because we're getting back something. So if you look in our job output, because we're logging stuff, you can see we can get back blog articles. That looks great. And then we're getting back YouTube interview URLs. But if you look, interview is singular. In our app, we made it plural. So that was why we were getting an error. So if we head back over here to our position info, update this to be just singular, that is going to work now. Then if we come back over here, going to cause an error because, you know, we've typed in the wrong thing. So we're going to fix that real fast. Now we're going to try running it again. Now that everything's looking smooth, and we're going to try running again and do a little bit more live debugging if anything else comes up. So we're going to do Tesla once more. We're going to do the CEO to get some more information, add it, go off and click start. Once again, it's going to start running and we'll come right back once it's finished getting the final output. All right, guys, this is super exciting. It actually went off and found all the information that we needed. It looked up the CEO of Tesla, found out that it was Elon Musk, and then it went off and actually found some articles for us. So we'll go ahead and click open those up, and we'll go ahead and click and open up some of these YouTube videos too. Let me mute it. But you can see it actually is literally leading us to actual blog articles that we can read. So these URLs are working.
I'm being told we wrap up. Let's talk a bit about your
And we could actually, you know, back in our application, add a lot more data if we wanted to look at more companies and more positions, but I'll let you do that on your own time. But the other part that I think is pretty cool, you can see we started this job around like 8:56 and the job finished around 8:58. So, well, it really took a little over a minute and 10 seconds to finish this job, which is awesome. That's super cool that our crews are working this fast. So give yourself a huge pat on the back. You just launched making a Flask backend application that kicks off crews. Those crews go off and search the internet to look up YouTube videos and blog articles. And then you also have a front-end application that's passing along companies and positions to your backend application, and then it's constantly polling your backend Flask application to see the status of the crew. So all around, in my opinion, you are an expert full stack AI developer, and I'm super excited for you guys. But that's a wrap for this video, guys. I hope y'all enjoyed this CrewAI and Next.js full stack tutorial, and I hope y'all are excited to go off and build your own full stack projects after this. But I just want to recap a few important things. You can go grab the free source code for this down in the link below. I have a Skool Community I just made for you guys completely for free. So if you have any questions or want to meet other developers who are interested in AI, definitely want to check out that. We're at like 200 to 300 members going strong. So it's super awesome engaged community. But outside of that, I have a ton of other AI and CrewAI tutorials right here on this channel. So be sure to check out whichever videos pops up on the screen right after this. And I am super excited to see you guys in the next video. Have a great day. See y'all soon. Bye.